Great. The meeting will please come to order. This is a regular meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Wilmette. I'll now ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Trustee Sullivan.
Here.
Trustee Barrow.
Here.
Trustee Dodd.
Here.
Trustee Kurzman.
Here.
Trustee Kennedy.
Here.
Trustee Plunkett.
Here.
And President Belinsky.
Here. So all here, we obviously have a quorum. This meeting is being conducted remotely via Microsoft Teams software. And I will now ask Peter Skiles, our Director of Administrative Services, to explain some logistics to members of the public joining us tonight.
Thank you, President Belinsky. So everybody will have joined the meeting tonight muted. And when President Belinsky calls for public comments, those joining with the Teams client, you can unmute yourself by just either tapping on your screen or using your mouse to wake up the meeting toolbar, and there's a microphone button that you can click on to toggle your mute status. Those joining by audio conference dial-in can toggle their mute status by pressing *6. And it's important to note that only attendees can unmute themselves. No one else can unmute another attendee. And just a reminder that public comment can also be provided by emailing publiccomment@wilmette.com or through the Village's YouTube live stream located. Well, President Belinsky will mention more about that in a moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skiles. So for those watching this video in the future, the state of Illinois is currently under a gubernatorial disaster proclamation, which was issued by Governor Pritzker due to the coronavirus global pandemic. As a result, all in-person village governmental meetings have been canceled. However, the state has amended the Open Meetings Act to permit electronic meetings of governmental bodies like the village board during a gubernatorial disaster proclamation. So we are conducting our business tonight in compliance with these provisions of state law. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live on our local access cable channel number 6 and on the internet at our YouTube channel, and I'll read the URL for you. It's www.youtube.com/user/Village of Wilmette/live. So if you're watching on cable and you'd like to participate a little more fully, the chat feature on YouTube is available to you. So youtube.com/user/Village of Wilmette/live. A recording of this meeting will be archived on the Village's YouTube website, as we do with all of our other televised public meetings. Now, as Mr. Skiles alluded to, a remote meeting obviously requires a different mechanic for public participation. So to ensure that our residents, business owners, and other interested parties have the opportunity to participate in this meeting, we have solicited public comment prior to the start of the meeting via email. So if you sent an email to publiccomment@wilmette.com prior to the start of the meeting, our staff will read the email during the public comment portion of our agenda or around the appropriate agenda item, depending on what you submitted. If members of the public who are watching the broadcast would like to participate during our designated public comment periods, you may submit comments through the YouTube live chat feature, and a member of the village staff will read your comment to the village board. And my understanding is that that YouTube chat feature is to the right of the video screen. Also, some of you have connected to the meeting via the Microsoft Teams software or via the telephone. And at the appropriate time, I'll ask people to speak up if they'd like to make a public comment. Because of the logistical difficulties of not being together in person, I will first just ask people to identify themselves as someone who would like to address the board, and I will assemble a list, and then I'll call on the individuals person by person for their turn to speak. For people who are speaking during public comment, they will be allotted 3 minutes to address the board, just as they are during an in-person meeting. All comments from the public, regardless of how we receive them, will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting, as we always do. And again, I am going to actually mute everyone right now. So everyone is muted now, and please keep your connections on mute until you're ready to speak. Now, on to the meeting. Before each meeting, the board receives a packet of agenda materials, and these materials are also posted on wilmette.com on the Friday before our meeting, so that residents and other interested parties can review the very same materials that the village board members receive. This week's packet contained 486 pages. So I will move on now to item 2, which is public comment. At an in-person meeting, during public comment, individuals are allotted up to 3 minutes to address the board on an item which is not on the agenda. However, as I said earlier, this meeting is being conducted remotely. So first, I will ask people who are watching on YouTube Live to submit comments for the village staff to read. You can find the chat window to the right of the YouTube Live video window. And while people are typing their comments in the chat window, I will ask Mr. Skiles whether any public comments were submitted in advance of the meeting.
Yes, President Belinsky, we have 3 comments.
Okay, Mr. Skiles, if you would speak up just a little bit, and please read those public comments now.
Okay, the first public comment is from Cindy Levine and Wendy Zune. Dear President Belinsky, Village Board of Trustees, and Village Manager Brayman, we recognize that as a community and as a nation, we are living through disruptive and chaotic times. We have been disheartened to read and hear of some of the vitriol shared online and in communication with our local government leaders. The League of Women Voters of Wilmette has urged our members to lead the way and set an example for our community, communicating with respect and empathy even when we disagree with each other. We have written and posted on our website a public statement, quote, the importance of civil discourse, end quote, and we encourage everyone in our community to read it and consider it as they determine how they want to share their perspectives with governing bodies and with each other. This statement can be found at lwvwilmette.org. We are sharing the full statement attached with you and other government leaders and ask you to read this email during public comment at your upcoming meeting and to please include this email and our full statement in your public packet. Thank you for your service to the community. Second comment is from Pat Schultz. Good morning. We are grateful for the work done on the community playfield. However, we are strongly against the irrigation system as the park always floods and there is an abundance of water. We also oppose public restrooms, which have been rejected several times, and a lighted fitness path, which will hinder the safety of our property. Thank you for taking the time to hear our concerns. We are located at 2526 Laurel Lane. Thank you, Pat Schultz. And the third comment is from Charles Hargrave of 2540 Laurel Lane. I wish to commend the village for establishing the stormwater retention vault at the community playfield. We have had repeated incidents of flooding in this park and the surrounding residences over the last 33 years of my being a resident bordering community playfield. I am in hopes that this will alleviate this persistent problem. The village has also been very straightforward with regards to the scope of the project and keeping residents informed throughout the process. However, now that the project is nearing completion, the scope of the project has expanded with excavation expected to begin shortly west of the project area for installation of an underground irrigation system. Apparently, this stage of the project was mentioned in the intergovernmental agreement between the village and the Wilmette Park District. Affected residents were not sent notifications regarding the expansion of scope for the project. Original notifications had indicated that the work zone would be entirely contained within the constructed fencing demarking the project. Solicitation of public comments regarding this project on March 11th and April 8th of 2019 were limited to the project as a whole, which we welcomed, but no further details were brought up for discussion. I question whether a permanent irrigation system makes any sense where sufficient, even excessive, natural irrigation occurs. I accede that temporary irrigation may be needed to facilitate replanting of turf disturbed by the project, but suspect that need could be met much more economically with a surface supplied temporary irrigation system. The project apparently has also been expanded to include a public restroom and a lighted fitness path around the circumference of the park. There used to be a fitness route with activity stations circling the park. Though through disuse and lack of maintenance, those were removed years ago. A lighted path in proximity of the residences bordering the park would only serve to increase traffic adjacent to our properties and become a risk to safety and security. I fear that construction of public restrooms may also suffer from the same lack of maintenance as well as decreasing the safety and security of the area. And that's the last comment.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Skiles. So are there any individuals who have connected to the meeting via Microsoft Teams or via the telephone who would like to address the board? I'll ask them to please identify themselves now, and remember that you do have to take your line off of mute to do that. Okay. So finally, I will move on to ask if there were any comments from
President
people.
Belinsky.
Wait,
Yes.
President
This is
Belinsky?
Peter Skiles. I did observe one attendee, I think, attempt to raise their hand and make a comment.
Yeah.
Okay, sir, would you identify yourself, please? We can't hear you, sir. Are you on mute still? Did you dial in or are you on Microsoft Teams?
He's on Teams.
Okay.
Trying to find the,
I actually see that he's off of mute as well.
yeah, not muted, so the microphone might not be enabled. Tell you what, how about President Belinsky? I'll put my, let's see if I can reach out to that attendee
President
separately.
Belinsky, I believe that's the neighbor to 1111 Sheridan. And I'm
Well, that's
guessing.
going to be pulled off of consent, sir. So
Right.
public comment is for items not on the agenda. So if you can nod to me, if you're planning to comment on something that's on the agenda, nod and we will, okay. So
Okay.
we will, Peter, if you would work with him to try and figure out the issue, that'll probably be about another 30, 40 minutes into the meeting. So, okay, very good.
I'll put a message in the chat here with my my cell phone contact info so we can exchange text.
Okay, very good. So before we leave this, though, were there any comments that people submitted via the YouTube live chat?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear
Actually,
me
I
now?
just did hear someone. Yes, we can hear you
Yes.
All right, thank you. I think I've resolved the problem. Thank
Okay.
you.
now. Okay, great. So we will hear from you on item 3.5 when that comes up. It is coming off of consent, though.
Thank you.
Okay, so back to Mr. Skiles. Was there any comments received via the YouTube live chat?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, so we'll move on now from public comment to the consent agenda. That's item 3. As described on the agenda, items that are routine business that are not normally debated by the village board are placed on the consent agenda. All items beginning with the number 3 are on the consent agenda, and tonight the consent agenda consists of item 3.1 through 3.18.
President Belinsky, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Just back to the comments. I just normally when a resident has a question that we could at least attempt to answer. I was wondering if we're going to talk about the irrigation of the community play fields at all.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Brayman reached out to both of the individuals already, I believe. Isn't that accurate, Mike?
Yes, both of the residents who commented had sent me emails regarding it, and I had sent them detailed responses regarding the project, our interactions with the Park District, and our obligations under the IGA, and the next steps for the Park District in terms of their public review process for the bathrooms, the walking path, and the like.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for mentioning that, Trustee Plunkett. I intended to do that, but I think in the confusion over the technological problems, I blew by it. Okay, so back to the consent agenda. Items 3.1 through 3.18 are on the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are up for approval tonight, and if an item is not removed by a member of the audience and is not removed by one of the trustees, the item will be approved and it will not be discussed. So first off, I'm going to remove item 3.4 from the consent agenda because of an email from a resident. And then I believe in advance, Mr. Shapiro, you don't have to remove the item because I believe a member of the board is planning to remove item 3.5 from the consent agenda. So both of those items will be removed from the consent agenda. Is there any other member of the audience who would like to remove a different item from the consent agenda? Were there any, so anybody on YouTube Live should use the chat feature to submit their request. Did the staff receive any such requests which were submitted in advance other than the one that I've already addressed?
We have not.
Okay. And then are there any individuals that are connected to the meeting via Microsoft Teams or via the telephone who would like to remove an item from the consent agenda? I'd ask them to identify themselves now. And again, item 3.4 and 3.5 are going to be removed. Okay, Mr. Skiles, any items via YouTube Live that came in?
Just quick double check. No.
Okay. So are there any items that any of the trustees would like to remove from the consent agenda?
Yes, President Belinsky, item 3.5.
Thank you, Trustee Barrow. That was what I expected. So may I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda? And again, the consent agenda excludes item 3.4, which is the Zoning Board of Appeals case for 1010 Central Ave, and also excludes now item 3.5, which is the Zoning Board of Appeals report for 1111 Sheridan Road. So may I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda excluding those two items?
I so move.
I believe that was Trustee Kennedy. Is there a second?
Second.
And Trustee Plunkett. That's been moved and seconded. Would the clerk please call the roll on the motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Trustee Sullivan. Trustee Barrow.
Aye.
Trustee Dodd.
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman.
Aye.
Trustee Kennedy.
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett.
Aye.
And President Belinsky.
Aye. So the motion carries. The consent agenda has been adopted. If you were watching the meeting for an item on the consent agenda, it was just approved. Again, except for item 3.4 and 3.5, which were removed. So on the Land Use Committee report, item 3.3 was approved. So if you were here for that item, it's been approved and it won't be discussed anymore. You are welcome to stay dialed in or stay watching, but the item that of your interest has been approved. Next on the agenda is item 4, which is report of officers. So we'll start with the report from our village manager, Mr. Brayman.
I do have one report regarding the 2020 census. I'm happy to share with the board and the community that the village's self-response rate is 84.8%, which exceeds our 2010 rate of 82.8%. Wilmette is second in Illinois and in the top 15 nationally for communities of 25,000 residents or greater. And we want to remind our residents, if you haven't responded, it's not too late. You can still do so online or by phone in one of 13 languages, as long as you've lived in your house since April 1st. For more information, please visit our village census webpage or contact village staff. And as a reminder, census takers will be starting to visit homes and will be out through the end of September. And if you would like to, you can still continue to complete the census online or by phone. It's important that all of our residents do participate. The census data is used to draw the House of Representative districts for the next 10 years, and it's also used to allocate over $675 billion in federal funding annually. Responses are easy to complete and they're 100% confidential, and we want to thank all of our residents for already participating. We're really impressed and proud of the response rate we already have. That is all I have, President Belinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Brayman. Next report is from our Corporation Counsel, Mr. Stein.
No report, Mr. Mayor.
Next item on the agenda is item 5, which is the report of the Liquor Control Commissioner, and there's no report tonight. So we'll move to our standing committee reports. First up is Land Use Committee. Trustee Barrow.
Thank you, President Belinsky. Our first item is item 3.4, and I move approval of case number 2020-Z20, 110 Central Avenue, regarding a request for a special use for an adaptive reuse senior housing, 55 plus development, a 0.57 floor area ratio variation, a 9.29 foot front yard setback variation, a 9.26 foot west side yard setback variation, a 6.74 foot west side yard stair setback variation, a 3.74 foot west side yard deck setback variation, a 9.93 height variation, and 8.77 foot parapet height variation, a 0.65 foot elevator housing height variation, a 6.03 foot air conditioner condenser height variation, a 2.15 foot rear yard north parking space setback variation, a 1,284 square foot, 29.8% rear yard total impervious surface coverage variation, a 2,574 square foot, 59.8% rear yard pavement impervious surface coverage variation, and a variation from the requirement that 50% of the required parking spaces be enclosed to permit the modification of the existing building into a 16-unit apartment development and associated site improvements in accordance with the plan submitted. The use shall run with the use. Adoption of ordinance number 2020-036.
Is there a second?
You were on mute. Can you repeat that?
I might resign.
I'll second Peter's motion, but I'm not rereading that.
Nor is Peter.
All right, is there a second?
Trustee Sullivan will second him.
Okay. All right, so it's been moved and seconded. I removed this item from the consent agenda, so I will tell you why. We did receive an email from a resident suggesting that given that this is a multifamily development, that perhaps we could use this opportunity to talk about how affordable housing and the village's ordinances and the like relate in this particular situation. For those who are watching, this is the Masonic Lodge on Central, and it's an adaptive reuse, which is why there's such a laundry list of variances, because they're going to take what is an institutional use and turn it into a residential use, very similar to what was done, actually exactly similar to what was done with Mellencrot back in 2004 and 2005. So, Mr. Adler, if you would take the time to sort of explain the affordable housing process and what the developer, was required to do and why they were required to do it and the like, that would be helpful. I'll interject with a question or two as I usually do. It's a little harder remotely, but I'll try still. And we may have a question or two for Mr. Stein as well.
Great. Thank you, President Belinsky. In this particular case,
John, would you speak up a little bit?
Oh, sorry. In this particular case, the applicant was required to do an affordable housing consultation. Anytime new non-single family 2-unit or townhouse development is taking place, developers, applicants are asked to come into the village and meet with the village to talk about affordable housing. In this particular case, part of the development group was responsible for the building at 1129 Greenleaf. So they do have an understanding of the village's desire to see affordable housing. As I think you all remember, that was a completely by right building and does not have affordable housing, only had to go to the Appearance Review Commission. In this particular instance, the applicant is going through the standard zoning process. So the applicant must show that in this case, they're meeting the variation standards and the special use standards. Through the normal zoning process, there's not a requirement for a public benefit, provided the applicant shows that they're meeting the standards for a special use or variation, their request to be granted. And so in this case, it wasn't a matter of the applicant having to consider something like open space or affordable housing or another arguable public benefit to the village. Again, the applicant needed to show that the standards for special use and standards for variations were being met.
And
sorry,
Mr. Adler, the primary standard for meeting getting a variation, the one that is the difficult one, if you will, is hardship, right?
Correct. Hardship, practical difficulty, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And in the case of, our standard practice with older homes, is that there's a lot of latitude around hardship, because from a public policy point of view, we'd rather see older homes with more unique architecture preserved versus being torn down and having one of the more cookie cutter, if you will, designs which sort of maximize the use of the land put there in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from staff's point of view, having walked the building, then unfortunately needing to tell the owners of the building, the masons, that it could no longer be in use because of the condition, we were concerned that the building was going to be lost. And if you talk about character of the neighborhood, this building sure lends to the character of the neighborhood. And so the village was staff was very excited to see that there were interested developers and an interested developer who has pursued this. And as I think you also pointed out, President Belinsky, much of the relief is due to the fact that this existing building is being used. So a lot of the relief that's being requested is because we have a large, tall building in a townhouse residence district. So by right, you'd be permitted 2 single-family homes there and 4 townhomes. That's what you'd be allowed by right. Again, from staff's point of view, the saving of a historically significant structure and also adding density within walking distance of the village center was very exciting, provided they could show that they meet those standards we were talking about for variation in the special use.
Right, and you alluded to this, but in essence, if this was sold to a developer who wasn't planning to do an adaptive reuse, we could expect there to be 4 townhomes built instead,
Correct.
not dissimilar to the townhomes that are nearby.
Right. I mean, somebody could have come in and asked for more than 4 townhomes. We know that it hasn't been developed, but a similar size lot on Wilmette Avenue, they got approval for 5 townhouse units. Again, those weren't developed, but yes, that's what we would have expected to see if a interested party didn't come to save the building.
And then the final question I think I have, at least for the moment, you know how I am, sometimes I ask more. The adaptive reuse provisions under the zoning ordinance, really the only thing you can do is to convert a building like this to, in essence, senior housing, and that's the same provisions of the ordinance that were used when Mallinckrodt was developed.
Correct, yes.
Okay. All right, and Mr. Stein, from a legal point of view, the village's current ordinances wouldn't require affordable housing in this case. And frankly, even through the PUD process, affordable housing is one of the public benefits that could be put forward. But through the zoning process, as Mr. Adler alluded to, there's no public benefit requirement. So it's merely showing that the standards of review are met, primarily hardship, and then the project can proceed forward. Am I getting that right from just like the legal point of view?
You are absolutely correct.
Okay. All right. So at this point, let me ask the board members. I pulled it off of consent, and that I think we've addressed the reason that it was pulled off of consent, but I will ask the board members, members of the village board, if they have any questions for Mr. Adler or Mr. Stein.
President Belinsky, can I just ask a question? Because I know to either you or Mr. Adler, just because there's a lot of comparison to Mallinckrodt, but when Mallinckrodt was first redeveloped, it was age 62 or higher, and then we reduced it, or when did we make that change? And I may have missed that in the minutes. I know we made the change and then it sold out eventually.
Yes. Basically, Mallinckrodt started before the recession, got caught up in the recession. That developer chose to sell. I believe it was a friendly sale to another developer because they weren't able to finalize the development. That new developer and I believe some owners that were already in the building came to the village and asked us to lower the age limit from 62 to 55. And we did so by amending the zoning text to lower that from 62 to 55 years.
That was definitely done while I was on the board. So sometime in the last 10 years or 9 years, but I don't remember the year. John, do you remember the year?
It probably was 2009 or 10.
It had to be later than that because I wasn't on the board until 2011.
Then 11, 12.
Yeah. Okay.
Mallinckrodt is still 55. How do we monitor that?
Well, they're responsible for monitoring that. Yeah.
And so that'll happen in this case as well, that given these are rentals.
Yes.
And
Right.
And my understanding, Trustee Sullivan, of the ordinance is, and Mr. Stein or Mr. Adler can correct me if I'm wrong, the requirement is just that one individual in the household be over 55. It's not everyone in the household. So you could have children living in the home in these buildings. I'm not aware of, I know one of the residents of Mellencrot fairly well, since she's my mother, and I'm not aware of any children that live in Mellencrot, but there isn't a prohibition against it.
And I remember that came up in Mallinckrodt as well.
This is Trustee.
Okay, other questions? It looks like there's a whole bunch of people ready to talk.
I had a question too. Oh,
Yeah,
So-
I'm sorry.
Go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Trustee Kennedy, go ahead.
Oh, I have a question. Aside from the legal requirements regarding affordable housing, is there any reason why the village couldn't undertake a sort of voluntary discussion with a developer about whether it was practical to include affordable housing as a voluntary matter?
I believe, I'll defer to John on this one, but I believe that actually happened in this case. We do a affordable housing council prior to an application coming in. And that kind of guides the applicant which way, whether it's a PUD or going through the standard zoning of special use variation.
Right.
So the answer to your question is yes, and I also think it happened in this case.
Yeah, we always encourage affordable housing. When even with a by right development, we would encourage it.
And what sort of criteria do you apply in deciding whether it's appropriate for a particular project? Because some are just not going to work out economically.
Would be a question for the applicant in this case with this particular development. If
I think, do we have the applicant on? I think I see the applicant.
Yes, Steve Blonsky.
Would you speak up, please, sir?
Steve Blonsky, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So I think the question was, what was your perspective on affordable housing in this project, and was it something that you thought you could include?
Like John said, we did have a affordable consultation, and just running through the numbers and the cost to bring this building back, kind of to glory, and then to execute our plan. It just financially was not going to be feasible in this situation.
Hi, this is Trustee Plunkett. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about, preserving a historic structure. And I think we need to understand, obviously there's no requirement here for the affordable housing, but I think we might just need a little bit more background on, is this more expensive for you to rehab this historic structure versus building new? What kind of considerations were made in this kind of situation here?
I mean, that's kind of a two-sided question. If we're going to build the exact same size building from scratch versus rehabbing it, no, it would not be more expensive. We're basically gutting the entire building, but for the shell. So, if we're building new, we'd have, demolition, masonry, foundation. I mean, a lot of extra costs, but with the current zoning, we wouldn't be able to replicate that size of building. So, what we purchase a land for, doing 4 townhouses, I mean, would be a no-go. But we are making a significant investment on, rehabbing this building.
Other questions from the board?
Thank you. I thought that was helpful.
Okay, so since this was pulled off of consent, I am going to solicit public comment in case there was somebody else who was going to pull it off of consent so they could make a public comment. I feel I should do that. So, again, in an in-person meeting, I look for a show of hands, but we're not doing an in-person meeting. So if there are folks who are watching this on YouTube Live, please submit comments now via the chat window, which is to the right of the video window. And then I believe the answer to this, Mr. Skiles, is that there were not, other than the public comment which asked for us to remove it from the consent agenda, there were not any other public comments submitted in advance on this. Is that correct?
Right, I believe not. I read everything that was submitted prior to the meeting.
Okay, so I won't ask that question again then. And then if there are any individuals who are connected to the meeting via Microsoft Teams or the telephone and would like to address the board on this application, I'd ask them to identify themselves now so I can create a list. Okay, so Mr. Skiles, did anybody submit any comments via YouTube live chat?
No.
Okay, so this is a case that comes to us with a positive recommendation from the zoning board. It only needs 4 votes. I don't know if there's any further discussion that any of the trustees would like to have at this point in time, but I will pause here, and if people have something to say, I will certainly grant the floor to them. But if not, then I would call for a vote afterwards. So, trustees, anything that anyone would like to add at this point? Okay, so hearing nothing here, I would just ask the clerk to please call the roll on the motion to grant the various zoning reliefs in case number 2020-Z-20, and then also approval of adoption of ordinance 2020-0-36. So would the clerk please call the roll on the motion?
Trustee Sullivan.
Aye.
Trustee Vero.
Aye.
Trustee Dodd.
Aye. Aye.
Trustee Kurzman.
Aye.
Trustee Kennedy.
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett.
Aye.
President Belinsky.
Aye, so the motion carries. The Zoning Board of Appeals recommendation stands, and ordinance 2020-0-36 has been adopted. And if I could just say, gentlemen, I hope the numbers work so that you can move forward with this, because it really would be very exciting from a number of public policy points of view, not the least of which is preserving the character of the village and a beautiful old building. Hopefully you can restore it to its old glory, and we can have additional residents here who would just be a short walk from, restaurants and other entertainment in downtown Wilmette. So thank you very much for your interest here, and good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on. Trustee Barrow, more from you tonight.
Thank you, President Belinsky. Our next item is item 3.5, which is Zoning Board of Appeals case number, and I hereby move approval for case number 2020-Z-22, 1111 Sheridan Road, regarding a request for a special use for an unusual recreational equipment, a 17.8-foot rear yard of a double frontage lot setback variation, and a 180.99 square foot, 5.35% rear yard of a double frontage lot impervious surface coverage variation to permit the retention of a seasonal batting cage in accordance with the plans submitted. The use shall run with the use. Adoption of ordinance number 2020-037.
All right, thank you, Trustee Barrow. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, that was a second from Trustee Dodd. It's been moved and seconded. Trustee Barrow, you asked for this item be removed from the consent agenda. So what's on your mind?
Thank you, President Belinsky. Let me say that I'm normally deferential to the decisions and the findings of our zoning board, because I normally find their approach to be thoughtful and thorough and consistent with our code. I'm concerned that they may have gotten this one wrong, and I'd like all of us to give some additional thought to it. Before getting into the substance of this case, though, I'd like to express to the Hetzeses my understanding of their motivation for the batting cage that we're talking about. Every one of us, children, teenagers, adults, need recreation, exercise, and fun. I have 2 grandchildren that are avid baseball players, and anyone that has a son or a daughter that's a baseball player or softball player would delight in having a batting cage in their backyard or their home. So I understand why one might want to have a batting cage in their home. What we have here is a structure that's 13 feet by 54 feet by 12 feet that's located effectively in the front yard of a home. I appreciate this is a double frontage lot, and this technically might be considered a rear yard, but for anyone walking by this home, well, certainly if you live on this street, this is the front of the house. So effectively, I view this as the placement of this batting cage in the front yard. What the zoning board has approved is the location of this batting cage in the home for 8 months. That's 2/3 of the year. And I think that we should also focus, besides the time, I think we also should give some thought to the way a batting cage is used. The arguments that are in favor that Mr. Hatz is arbitrary.
Trustee Barrow, I'm gonna cut you off for a second here.
Yeah.
And ask Mr. Adler to do his usual slide with the and John, I don't. Do you have a screen to share?
I do. Thank you.
So I'm going to have him summarize. We're going to go through this just like a regular zoning case now,
Fine,
off
and
the
then come
consent.
back.
So I'm going to ask John to share his screen, describe the issues for us, and then I'll go back to you so you can express your concern, and then I'm going to go to the applicant, and then I'm going to go to public comment, and then I'm going to go back to the applicant, and then we're going to talk about it. So I'm going to let John describe it, and then Peter, I'm going to let you describe your concern so that the applicant can address it directly.
Thank you.
Can you see my screen?
We can see your screen, John. Thank you.
Great. As was mentioned by Trustee Barrow, this is a special use for unusual recreation equipment, and there is a rear yard of a double frontage lot setback variation. I do want to point out that because the batting cage in this case is installed over natural grass, that the impervious surface variation isn't necessary. While that was discussed at the zoning board, I did want to point that out, and that could be stricken. The primary question to consider is, does this request meet the special use standards for the unusual recreation equipment and the variation standards for the setback variation? If the answer is yes, the applicant could keep the batting cage up in the current location and use. If no, the variations are denied, the special use is denied, they'll be required to remove the batting cage. I'm not going to go through all these special use standards.
Well, John, let's actually, normally you wouldn't, but let's just,
Sure.
If we could just quickly, the first one is the generic comprehensive plan. The second one is not detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare. The third is, and this is probably one that is a focus one, as we always have ones that are relevant or not. The use in the specific location will not be injurious to the use or enjoyment of other property in the neighborhood for the purposes permitted in the district. The fourth one is it won't impede normal or orderly development and improvement of surrounding properties. The fifth is it won't diminish property values. The sixth relates to drainage. The seventh is ingress egress. The eighth is consistent with the community character of the neighborhood of the parcel for the special use. There's no archaeological stuff probably. Buffers, landscaping, etc. And my screen, my thing is in the way here. I can't read the last one.
It's other standards that the zoning ordinance applies for unusual.
Okay. So I think here the key probably standards, and if you would you agree with me that it's probably C, injurious to the use or enjoyment, and maybe H, community character.
Yes, I think arguably that's true. Yes, those are the two to consider.
And since it's a temp, in my opinion, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here or ahead of you, Trustee Barrow, but E, given that it can be removed, I'm not sure it's substantially diminishing property values. It's not a permanent structure, but I could see where we could have a discussion over whether use standard C and use standard H are met here. So sorry, John,
Yep.
I just thought in this case that, you know, there are specific special use ones that we don't see quite as often.
Absolutely. And then next are
Do you mind going back to your previous slide? I just want to see how you worded something. Okay, perfect.
and the next are the variation standards. President Belinsky, did you want to walk through those also?
No, I don't think so, because on the variation standards, if people were comfortable with the special use, you probably get there on the setback because the hardship is sort of apparent from the shape of the lot. So I think the special use standards are far more important in this case than the variation standards.
Here's the site plan. This is the site plan that's in your packet, showing the location of the batting cage and indicating the height. The last thing I'm going to show is was asked to think of potential conditions. There's a number of these conditions which were applied to the only other batting cage request we have on record, and that was on Sandy Lane. And that one was time of use, the duration that it could stay up, and then no artificial lighting, only natural lighting in that case. But these were conditions that, again, as staff, we were asked to think about and throw out there for potential consideration if it's deemed to be necessary.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Adler. Now, Trustee Barrow, I'll go back to you, and
all right,
and you can share your perspective, and for the applicant's point of view, that's really what we'd like to talk. We'd like you to address is Trustee Barrow's concerns. This did come with a positive recommendation, so the zoning board approved it overall. But Trustee Barrow, if you'd express your concerns, and then we'll let the applicant respond to that. We'll have public comment, and then we'll talk about it.
all right. Thank you, President Belinsky. So what we're talking about is placing a structure of some size, 13 by 54 by 12, in essence, the front yard of a home, and doing it so for 2/3 of the year. And it's a structure, a batting cage, which by its normal and expected use generates a great deal of sound, a harsh metallic sound of a ball being struck by a bat. Now, an argument was made by the applicant that this is a temporary structure. And yes, it is temporary in the sense that it's not permanent, but it's in place for 8 months of the year. It's in place for 2/3 of the year. So I don't know when something becomes permanent or temporary, but something that's in place for this amount of time, say, is unlike a wedding tent that might be put up for a couple of days before an event, used for some number of hours, and then taken down promptly after an event, few days in total. This is expected to be up and used for an 8-month period. So I don't really view it as temporary in a meaningful sense. My concern about this and the discussion that was had at the zoning board was that we have a number of structures that are kind of like this, and this is really not different from, say, a basketball backboard, a sport court, or, as discussed at length at the zoning board, an ice skating rink. But I think this is significantly different than an ice skating rink. An ice skating rink is 2 to 3 feet tall, not 12 feet tall. And ice skating rinks are used in the coldest of winter, when it's been cold for several days at a time, when, frankly, the only people that are out and about are the hardiest walkers and people that are outside. People are not in their yards, people are not on their porches. Windows are closed. And so the skating rink is different because it doesn't generate the kind of sound that a batting cage does. The skating rink, you might hear, children or people laughing or talking or having fun, and you'd hear the sound of ice skates on the ice. But you don't hear the sound that a batting cage makes. And I don't think it's an accident that our park district locates batting cages away from nearby homes, because they are loud. And I'm concerned about going down the route of imposing conditions which really can't be enforced. Because the normal use of a batting cage you'd have, a friend over, maybe several friends over. I think maybe invite the team over. That would certainly be convenient, as this batting cage is. A pitching machine, an electric pitching machine is inexpensive, and certainly could have the batting cage used for an extended period of time. So I'm concerned about imposing conditions upon this. And when I turn specifically to the standards for variations, I don't see here that the standards were adequately addressed by the zoning board and have been addressed by the applicant, whose burden it is to show that the standards have been met. The standard, particularly of practical difficulty or particular hardship other than inconvenience. It may be inconvenient to take a son, I believe he's 15 years old currently, to a batting cage that's 1 mile away, but it's simply an inconvenience. And, presumably the young man will have a driver's license and can drive to the batting cage himself. The other part of Section 5 is that the applicant can't make a reasonable use of the property. I think the applicant here can do anything they want with the property, other than perhaps have a batting cage. And I'm not sure that's really a meaningful limitation. And the final one that's problematic is the essential character of the neighborhood. And as I drive around on Elmwood Avenue and nearby, I don't see any batting cages or structures like this in front yards or side yards or visible backyards. Sure, we see some playground equipment in rear yards, but you don't see batting cages. Now, I understand the applicant has found a batting cage on Ashland Avenue, but that batting cage apparently never received village approval. So I don't really view that as precedent for approving this batting cage when that one was put up like this one without prior approval. So I don't think the Section 5 standards here have adequately been met. And then I looked at the definitions that are part of special recreational equipment that have to be made. And that the installation and character of the equipment must reflect the scale and location of a facility generally accepted as usual and customary in single-family districts. That's not Wilmette. We don't have structures of this size and of this type, essentially in our front yards. So I don't know that the first standard, frankly, has been satisfied. And the second one, most importantly, is that the standards and level of the duration of noise produced must reflect what is accepted as usual and customary in single-family neighborhoods. And while skating rinks are somewhat common in Wilmette, batting cages, and to some degree even sport courts, the noise of a metal bat striking a ball over and over and over again is not normal and customary in our residential neighborhoods. It's something that we hear and see in our parks because, to my view, that's really where it belongs. Now, I know the zoning board discussed whether the location in this case would actually be better than placing a batting cage in a rear yard where it might bother 3 or more neighbors. And that certainly may be the case. It may very well be that this is more bothersome in a rear yard even than a front yard. But that says to me that the type of recreational equipment that is a batting cage probably doesn't have a place in our Wilmette lots. Our lots are small. This isn't West Lake Forest where the lots are half an acre or so. Our lots are small. That's why we live here. We like that. But that means you have to make accommodations and not create activities that, harass or vex your neighbors. And I think that's arguably the case here. What we're talking about now is important in this case, and it's important for this applicant. But we know that there's another batting cage case coming up, or unless that Ashland Avenue property simply takes it down. So what we're doing tonight really needs to be thought about for precedent purposes. So as I began, I am sympathetic to what this family has done. And I understand that by taking the approach that they've had, they've been able to keep their batting cage up basically for the entire summer. This is now the end of August. If this board determines that it's not a proper use for the property, I would recommend that we nevertheless allow it to remain for the remainder of the baseball season, which would be through the end of October, rather than have it be removed promptly after this decision. So anyway, that's my thinking, and thank you.
President Belinsky, you're on mute.
Thank you, Trustee Sullivan. Happens,
We're just
happens to
gonna
all
let
of
it
us.
go on for a while.
The applicant, you've heard Trustee Barrow's comments, and I think he articulates clearly and thoroughly the side of the side that you would have if you thought this shouldn't be granted. So And we've read the zoning board case. We understand the background. So I think if you would take a few minutes here to focus on how you might address Trustee Barrow's concerns or not, as the case may be. We'll let you speak. We'll let the neighbors who have dialed in speak, and then the board members will discuss and debate it. So the applicant, the floor is yours. And I'm going back on you. Hopefully I won't forget this time.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I guess I would like to respectfully disagree with Mr. Barrows. He went through a number of different rationale. Let me just start with those I took notes on. The first is he was saying it's not a permanent structure, but it's permanent. Either it's permanent or it's not permanent. Anything that comes out of the ground and anything that is up, not the full year long, the full year round is not permanent. A pool is permanent. A batting cage of this type is not permanent. He made the point around it being different than a skating rink. And I would contrast that to a hockey rink. This isn't, what I see around the neighborhood are more around items where people play hockey, they hit slap shots, and it was somehow implied that you don't hear the noise. I would argue you do hear the noise when people are playing hockey and hitting slap shots. That's a normal part of the game. There was a point made about it being during the time of year where you would hear it a lot, and I would say that were it not for the kind of the COVID scenario where probably Mr. Shapiro's home working from home, he'd normally probably be downtown. Most of us would be downtown. My son would be at school or baseball practice and probably wouldn't be even around the house a lot. So I don't think that there's a huge argument there. The other thing that I think is important to note here is the time that elapses when one is in a batting cage. So for those of you that golf and go to the driving range and you hit a bucket of balls, my guess is you're not hitting 10 buckets of balls. And the reason for that is because it's very tiring. When you're hitting baseballs, even a bucket of baseballs, and I timed it, it's about 6 minutes to throw to the batter. And by the way, I'm the human pitching machine. We don't have a pitching machine, a mechanical one. And so if two people are in the cage, which is usually the case, my son and his friend, you're talking about 10, 15 minutes. And that probably happens a couple times of a week. So we're not talking about, a 9 to 5 construction site kind of noise. So I kind of disagreed there. There was comment about the neighborhood character and that one doesn't see, the one would see it. So what I like to do is, if we're able to see this, let's see. I'm going to try and share my screen if I can. What you're seeing here is another batting cage that's not hidden. It's in plain view. It's on Wilmette Avenue, and it's not far from the Village of Wilmette's headquarters. And if you look at that structure, that is not a temporary structure. Those are large beams that are cemented into the ground. I don't believe it's got all the distances from fences and yards and homes and all the things that our batting cage does. So, I think that argument is flat. And by the way, I've seen other batting cages around the neighborhood as well. And there's a precedent. Let me see if I can get the case number. Ordinance 2010-0-75, which was provided in the background materials, is a case where variance was granted for a batting cage. So to say that there's not batting cages and it's unusual equipment, I would almost argue that it might be usual equipment, the fact that we're seeing the number that we're seeing. So those are kind of my comments on those that Mr. Barrows raised. And I guess that kind of my rationale is kind of the following points. One is it's a very unique property. If you look at it, it's like a pizza slice, and that is our yard. You can call it a front yard, a side yard, whatever you want to call it. That's our yard, and that's what we have to work with. And it's a hardship to me to be able to use my yard, just like everybody else who pays taxes in Wilmette get to use their yard. Number two, it's got to be consistent with precedent. In the materials that were provided for this case tonight, there were 26 variances, 26 cases cited, and all 26 were approved. So if this is not approved, this would be the first that is not approved of the 26 that were cited as comps. The third thing is, I think it's important to not be treated with prejudice. There are other cages in the village. There are other very visible cages, even more visible than my cage is. And so I don't know why this would be any different. And the most important point is that this is supported by an overwhelming majority of our neighborhood. In other words, it's not injurious and it doesn't wreck the enjoyment character. So of the 7 neighbors that, when you drew a circle around our house, of the 7 neighbors that expressed an opinion one way or the other, 6 of 7 expressed support, and they submitted notes in support. And I could read quotes off that, but it's in the materials. But it's stuff like, you couldn't even see, I almost didn't even know it was there. It doesn't bother me. All 3 contiguous neighbors approved it. So everybody who touches my house, who would be the most impacted by noise, all 3 of them sent letters supporting this. It was also supported by 4 of the 5 zoning board members, which heard all the cases and all the arguments. So the only people that have been against this so far, I'll add Mr. Barrows to the list tonight, were Mr. Shapiro and Trustee Falkoff, who, to his credit, disclosed that he had worked at a law firm with Mr. Shapiro for 20 years. And I don't know if there's anybody who's voting tonight, if there's a disclosure that somebody should make in terms of a business relationship or a personal relationship. I think that that's important to at least be fully disclosed about that. So for all those reasons, I think that this is, I think it's a very fair ask and a reasonable ask. Daisy, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to that.
I just wanted to say quickly, I noticed at the top of this screen that I'm seeing, it says sort of an exclamation point, recording has started. The person across the street has recorded my family multiple times, sometimes secretly. My children have seen him, and he's even gone to the street to record my children. I know he has the right to do so. However, there's a chasm between what is right and what is legal, and it needs to stop. Also, there is the batting cage. There is one on Ashland. There is also one, it's Wilmette Avenue and Forest. I just want to clarify that.
You can't miss it. So that I'll close with that. Those are the comments that I had.
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask the trustees if they have any questions.
Mr. Shapiro, it's Mr. Shapiro. Do I have an opportunity to speak as well?
You will be called on, yes, but not yet. During public comment, I will ask for people who'd like to make a comment, and and under our rules, you have 3 minutes for your comment. So
thank you very much.
Okay, trustees, any questions for the applicant?
I have a couple questions for Mr. Adler.
Okay, we can.
So we'll get to that next.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that second, unless you want to. Trustee Plunkett, can you go second, or do you want to go first to Mr. Adler? Either way works.
That does not matter.
Okay, let's stay with the applicant for a minute here.
Can I just ask a question, because I was following, but for the applicant, what was that comment about the end, about the connection and with people and whatever trustee you mentioned? Did I miss something?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying. The ZBA member Falkoff at the beginning, if you look at the beginning of the minutes, he noted that he had worked with Mr. Shapiro in the past.
He was a partner for 20 years with him. Yes.
Nobody on our.
And yeah. Go ahead.
And the reality, for Mr. Hatzis, the reality of the village board is that it's very likely that one of us knows some member that's in front of us, because that's how we generally get elected, by knowing a lot of people. And after serving for a while, you get to know more people too. So it's not infrequent that an acquaintance is in front of us here. So because we're a small place. So
that's fair. I would just draw a distinction between an acquaintance and somebody who's paid and does business. So if there's an economic relationship, I think that's fair to disclose.
Yeah, and I think you're insulting us now.
Yeah.
So I think Mr. Stein can tell you what those rules are, but I think you should end this line of questioning, because now you're suggesting that we have ethical problems.
So absolutely, Mr. Mayor, that is what the applicant is suggesting is completely incorrect. The relationship between any members of the board and an objecting neighbor really has no statutory conflict and would have no common law conflict whatsoever. It would be if a trustee owned the property or trustee had a vested interest in this. The neighbor in this situation is an objector. They could be a brother or a sister to somebody on the board, and there's no conflict in that. So that line of questioning or that line of commentary is incorrect and probably should not be considered.
Okay, so let's just keep going here. Questions for the applicant from board members?
No, thank you, President Belinsky and Mr. Stein. That's exactly what I was hoping would be conveyed.
Okay, so Trustee Plunkett, I'll move to you then. You had a question for Mr. Adler, and we may have other questions for Mr. Adler too.
Sure, and I think this is coming up more and more, especially this summer. I've had a lot of, people coming in with questions. Am I allowed to have an above ground pool? Am I allowed to have, if you could kind of go over what is just an overview of special use, because I feel like these issues are coming up more and more. And I do think that a lot of residents, may not know, what they're allowed to have, where, and what's unusual, and, not going through a laundry list, but a couple examples would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. We've seen a real large interest in swimming pools, temporary swimming pools where, quite frankly, people probably aren't interested in keeping them past this summer, but obviously want to, do something to keep their children active. And so we've seen an influx in swimming pools. Swimming pools are an administrative process where staff will go out, make sure that it's conforming, have a level of comfort that the location that's being proposed in is not going to be detrimental. Then we send notices to the neighbor. If a neighbor would object and not remove an objection with a change to the plan, then that request would go to the zoning board, and the village board is a special use. But swimming pools and spas are now a administrative process. And actually, I can't think of the last time a swimming pool had to come before the village board since we changed the ordinance to address them that way. Things like sport courts, as long as the coverages and the locations conforming, those are considered a permitted use. Hockey, we have differentiated between what I'll call an ice skating rink, and that doesn't mean that people can't play hockey on an ice skating rink, and a hockey rink, which would have boards typically 40 to 48 inches above the ice. The ones that have the boards above the ice, typically, I believe there's been one case where we looked at that as unusual recreation equipment. That one may have also had netting, I forget. Things such as trampolines, which people buy and put out, those we don't take permits for. Those, if they're in the front yard and we get a complaint or we notice it, we will give them a call and ask them to relocate those. Those should not be in the front yard. Neither should actually ice skating rinks. We usually handle things like that on a complaint basis because by the time we would bring somebody to court, it's probably down. So that's sort of the another example of a unusual recreation equipment. And what started this was a skateboard half pipe, that goes back into the 90s when somebody built not just a small ramp, a fairly large ramp in their backyard, and I think that's at the point in which the village developed that special use to sort of be a catch-all of those things that aren't necessarily to be completely prohibited, but to be allowed in certain circumstances as a special use. Did that?
Trustee Plunkett,
Thank you, John, that does. And so in a batting cage, it sounded like there'd been one approved before. Was that in a backyard, I'm assuming?
Yes, that was in a backyard. That came to our attention. It was already installed and came to our attention after it was installed.
Okay, and normally this would not be approved in the front yard, but this is a different situation with a double frontage.
Correct. Yeah, and that one was a little bit different in that, and I think one of the, at least one, if not two, of the batting cages that the applicant has pointed out has had a sort of a I'll call it a baseball surface or a compacted surface instead of the natural grass under the actual cage itself. In those cases, we have looked at that depending on how it drained as impervious surface.
Great. Last, not to throw the kitchen sink at you, but volleyball courts, tennis courts.
Both are considered permitted uses as long as they're meeting the requirements. Tennis courts run into problems usually because they need relief for the fencing around a tennis court. Usually somebody won't put up a tennis court unless they get the variation for the fencing around it.
And that variation is typically because it's chain link, right? And you need a variation for chain link and the height, correct, right?
Yeah, the height, yeah. Yeah, I think the last one we had was, there was one on Locust, and we've had a couple on Chestnut, or at least one on Chestnut.
Thanks, John.
I have another question for John, if Trustee Plunkett is done.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so John, I just wanted to go back to something that the applicant talked about. I just want to make sure I understood. So he referenced a number of zoning cases that were, that had been approved that were very similar to this. I think the number he mentioned was 26 or something. And I just want to go back to what I see in the material for a moment here. So I just have to bring up my, so if obviously at the beginning of each of the cases, it shows some of the various cases that are, what's been approved that's similar to this. I think you mentioned earlier that we really need to, we're no longer talking about the impervious surface requirements for this particular, so there's a number of requests obviously where we've granted rear yard impervious surface requests. So in my mind, just what I want to understand is, as I understand it, we've only approved one batting cage in the village that we're aware of, and that was in the rear yard.
Correct. Yes. Obviously.
Excuse me. Sorry. Yes.
I was just going to say, as Trustee Barrow mentioned, you're probably going to be seeing a couple more.
Okay. Again, but that one that we did approve was in the rear yard.
Correct.
And then in addition, you clarified, and I just want to make sure. So there is a difference from our perspective between an ice rink and a hockey rink.
Yes.
Okay. So an ice rink, which is typically 2 feet, just has boards that are about 2 feet. That is a administrative, that's a process where somebody can get that approved as an administrative use. We
actually do not even take.
We don't even take that into, okay, since it's only 2 feet or whatever.
Right. Okay, now, so sorry to interrupt. One of them we did because they did have the boards. It was actually something they could use in the summer because they had a synthetic ice that they could use in the summer. And that one did go through the unusual recreational equipment special use. We were looking at it because of being able to shoot slap shots, the noise it would make, just as a little bit different than people putting the enclosure for the water for an ice skating rink. Yeah. Not
And
that.
so then a hockey rink, which is higher, 4 feet, is that also administrative use, or is that, does that go through zoning?
If somebody came in and wanted to do the board, and usually at some point they're going to put up netting because they're going to be taking slap shots, that would be especially used as unusual recreation equipment.
Okay, so then that would go through zoning is what you're saying.
And I should clarify that might be going on that we're not aware of also.
Yes.
That's my suspicion. Yeah, I agree, John.
I agree.
It would not surprise me.
But I don't think what's going on, I mean, I think what we're trying to address is what's been approved by the zoning board or the board.
Yeah.
I think that's what's relevant here today.
Yeah.
And so that's what I just wanted to understand. So, and then also in general, those things that are approved, though, I think this is building on what Trustee Plunkett said. We are allowing these things, what we allow in the front yard and the backyard is very different.
Correct.
Okay. And I think that's important to this case.
I have a question for Mr. Adler.
Go ahead, Trustee Kurzman.
Thank you. After 414 Sandy Lane was approved with conditions, did we receive any amount of insight from neighbors about what the experience was like to have that nearby?
I don't recall receiving any complaints after it was approved. As you probably saw, it was up a limited, I think 2 more seasons after it was limited to 2 seasons after it was approved. That did come to us via a complaint of a next door neighbor, I believe. I don't think it was behind, I think it was to the side. But I don't recall after it was approved with the conditions, hearing from the complaining neighbor again.
So no, okay, thank you. So I guess what's occurring to me is that nobody has come for a permit for this. They basically have gotten cut and then are brought to us.
Yes, Yep.
And that could be a communication issue on our part. I know we've talked for years about how do we make it clear what you can and cannot do without a permit, and people are quite surprised at the things you can't do, like lay new sod. Can't lay new sod without a grading permit. And most of the work that you have done inside your home besides carpet and paint requires some sort of permit, right, John?
Correct.
Yeah, so, and we've multiple times have had new ways to try to communicate what you can and can't do around that. But the other side of that coin, Trustee Kurzman and Mr. Adler, is if a neighbor had complained about somebody's batting cage, the village would certainly investigate. And if it was determined that the batting cage, the hockey rink, whatever the structure was not in compliance, the village would then either get the resident to put it in compliance or push them through the appropriate process. So the other side of that coin could be there are a lot of batting cages being used and nobody's complaining about them.
That's fair. Mr. Adler, I doubt you can answer this, but I'm curious to ask nonetheless. You know, do we know the extent to which that batting cage was used? Was it used to what it was brought as the expectation? Was it used more or less? You know.
And
yeah,
Trustee Kurzman, you're talking about the 414 Sandy Lane one, right?
Correct. Yes.
I could tell you in a sense it might have been a similar situation. As I recall, the owner's son was either on the New Trier team or was trying out for the New Trier team. Was a very good, baseball player, and that was the desire and why they installed it. I'm not sure the extent of the use. If it was. I don't recall them talking about a group of players from the person's team coming and using the batting cage. That I don't recall that, but it's been a little bit of time since that was before us.
Okay, well, thank you.
All right, any other questions for Mr. Adler or for the applicant? Okay, so we'll move on to public comment. So again, as I've said 3 times, I think tonight at an in-person meeting, I would look for a show of hands. But this meeting is being conducted remotely. So you can submit comments to the village staff via YouTube Live chat window. So if you're interested in doing that, please do that now. And while people are typing, I'm actually not going to ask whether any public comments were submitted in advance because I know the answer to that because Mr. Skiles told me he read everything that was submitted in advance. But I do know there's at least one individual who's connected to the meeting via Microsoft Teams or via the telephone who would like to address the board. So I'll ask before, I guess that's Mr. Shapiro, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other individuals who are on the phone who would like to address the board on this matter? Okay, it appears that there is not. So Mr. Shapiro, the floor is yours. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Cliff Shapiro. I live across the street from the batting cage in question, and I was not able to be at the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting because my wife's dad passed away unexpectedly. And so I've watched the YouTube video of that, and I appreciate you giving me a few minutes tonight to address this with you. I have no desire to be talking against my neighbors. I know they're good people. I know they're doing what they want, what they think is best for their child. I'm the proud father of a New Trier soccer player, and for many years she was on the varsity team. And we would go over to the park and kick a soccer ball there because I couldn't fit a full-size soccer net in my backyard. But I understand their motivation, and I don't have any problem with that. We also have no problem with normal neighborhood noise. I have a sport court next to my backyard on one side, and I have teenagers on the other side in the backyard. All kinds of normal neighborhood noise. So we don't have a problem with that. And I've really struggled with this, okay? I've been in my house for 28 years. I've never had a problem with a neighbor. I love my neighbors. And I've really struggled with this. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's right for there to be a full-size batting cage in the front yard of a house on Elmwood Avenue. The fact that it is in a front yard, I think, is very important, and I think it is a precedental issue for the village. And it's not just me saying that, by the way. The village code specifically protects the appearance of front yards by specifically prohibiting the installation of any unusual recreational equipment, including a sport court, in a front yard. The village code specifically prohibits this exact use. The only way you're allowed to get this use is through the special use permit. And in order to get the special use permit, as we've all been talking about tonight, is you have to show, the homeowner has a burden to show actual hardship, that it is typical, and that it doesn't affect the character of the neighborhood. Well, again, I've been in my house for 28 years, and I hope we can all agree that a full-size batting cage in a front yard is not typical on Elmwood Avenue or anywhere else in the village. And I hope we can all agree that putting a full-size batting cage in the front yard does affect the character of the neighborhood. So I think the key question here, at least for me, the key question that I frankly have really been struggling with is simply this. Other than the fact that this particular lot does not have a backyard, is there any real hardship? Where is the actual hardship and need that would justify putting a full-size batting cage in a front yard on Elmwood Avenue? And believe me, I've really struggled with that. If there was a real need, I'd live with the unsightly thing across the street. It's big. And I got news for you. In the spring, when March through April or May and June, when there's no foliage, it's really ugly. There used to be a beautiful front yard, and now we've got a front yard with a huge batting cage. I would live with the noise if there really was a need. And the noise is loud, okay? And the reason I took a video was to show you. I knew I was going to have to show you because they wouldn't talk to me about it. And so I took a video to show you how that noise actually takes place. Look, I can only conclude that there is not the kind of unusual, exceptional circumstances here that warrant putting a full-size batting cage in a front yard. I'm sorry I have to take that position, but I think it's an important position for the village. I really do think this is a precedential issue. I've heard that there are other ones coming up, and I think you all, unfortunately, do have to struggle with this. The village
So,
specifically.
Mr. Shapiro, I'm gonna cut you off. You've gone well over your time. If you want to wrap it up, please.
Thank you very much, and I apologize for going over my time. All I'm going to say to conclude is that the village does specifically prohibit this exact use except in exceptional circumstances. I just don't think we have those here. Thank you for your time.
Okay, just as a follow-up to everyone's comments, Mr. Stein and Mr. Adler, let's just make sure we have the standards right here. So for the special use, you do not need to demonstrate hardship for the special use. The standards are other than that. For the zoning variation, for the setback, you do have to demonstrate hardship, and hardship relates to all of the, I mean, these are all at the end of the day judgments, the 7 of us applying our judgment to these standards of review. But let's just be clear on this. So with regards to the special use, hardship is not a standard.
Correct.
That's correct.
And then with regards to the setback, hardship is a standard. And in this case, the shape of the lot would be and also frankly, so let me ask a question about the use in the front yard or in the side yard, the double frontage. Is that more under the special use or is that more hardship under the zoning variance? How would you sort of take that?
So you're really kind of looking at the special use at that point, because it's not about the design of the land. It's about this actual structure or temporary structure that's going up and the use that's going to be applied to that. That's a batting cage. So that's why the application for this was a special use. If it was, you can take into account, obviously, the potential location, but that comes under the variation standards. And that's more about the setbacks and the side yards and the other component to this request. So the cage itself is about the use only. The location and the design and the size of it comes into the variation aspect, which is taking the whole property into account, and then the hardship standard.
Right, but the special use includes sort of the location. That's part of the special use process, which is, you know, in essence, a special use is, it's not prohibited, but you need a special use because we want to make sure that, given that it's a little weird, now whatever it is, not this particular case, but given that it's a little weird, whatever you're asking for, we're not saying it's not allowed, but we want to make sure it's the way you're using that use is appropriate for the place that you're using it, which in essence encapsulates all this. And there is the reasonable use of the property. Is that language also in the special use, or is that just part of the hardship language?
I would have to.
I just want to make sure we're applying the right standards. That's all.
Can we ask, can you ask, I think you're asking some really good questions, President Belinsky. John, can you bring up the special use slide again, just for a moment, while you're asking these questions? Because we talked about item C and 8. I can't remember, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's do that.
It's a good idea.
Do you mind? Because I think that this is. So I think what you said was we think, I think because this is an unusual piece of equipment, I don't know what to use, but I think what we said is it is about the specific location and if it's consistent with the character of the neighborhood.
Right, that's H.
H. So to your question, President Belinsky, the front yard is really more under the special use.
Yeah, and it matters. It's exactly the question that we're asking. Is this specific location okay with it?
Right.
That is the question.
Yeah.
Can I interject? Sorry.
No, go ahead. Let's let Trustee Dodd finish and then Trustee Plunkett will go to you.
And so I think that this is actually, it is important because we talked about things like swing sets for a moment or trampolines, like maybe trampolines, which you said doesn't require a special use.
You know, a trampoline, we wouldn't take a permit for a trampoline.
But would we allow a trampoline in a front yard?
No, I mean, no, trampolines are not supposed to be located in the required front yard.
Okay.
But someone could go through a process if they wanted to.
They could, and you know, we've had on occasion, I think there's been a couple of occasions where they've been in the front yard or side yard adjoining the street and neighbors were concerned and we asked that it be moved. And usually that's not that difficult with a structure like a trampoline. But,
Right.
yeah.
And so what about, we don't allow, I know we asked this earlier, but I'm just because we don't allow swimming pools in the front yard.
We do not. Now, there have been occasions where in rear yard of double frontage lots where a swimming pool's encroached into what would be the setback. I think in those cases, there were lots where the rear was allowed to have a closed fence. Where,
okay.
You know, where, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that sort of gets to the heart of the variation process. The point is, you can't cover everything, and you know, right. is this the specific location that's consistent with the community character of the neighborhood?
Right.
Well, that's the question for us, because you can't legislate that.
Well, and I thought your question about hardship or not was a good one. So, yeah.
So, Trustee Plunkett.
Yes, this goes to Mr. Adler's just mentioning the fence, because you know, there are a number, not a lot. I don't know how many of these double frontage lots in Wilmette, but some of them have, you know, a solid 6-foot high fence in what would be a front yard, but is their backyard. And I'm just curious, as like a property like this, it would look horrible in my opinion, but would they be allowed to have a 6-foot high solid fence?
They would not. We've got some fence exemption areas because of the busyness of certain streets that we allow them. They would be allowed, as you know, to have arborvitae or mature landscaping as tall as one would want to, you know, provide privacy or to close it off. The only time we would look at landscaping or arborvitae would be if it's at the corner for sight distances for cars and pedestrians.
Okay, so there are some situations where a double frontage, you are still treating in terms of like fencing and landscaping as a backyard.
Correct. Right.
Yeah, and John, you sort of referenced it, but when you have, you know, corner lots with side yards adjoining the street and the like, you have these issues pop up all the time as well, in terms of what can and can't be where, how close to the street and all the rest of it, even though it's their back or their side yard, because it's adjoining a street, these kind of questions come up. And again, this is what the point of the variance process is for us to apply our judgment on whether or not it works when the zoning ordinance says you need a special use or you need a variation.
Correct.
Okay.
I would like to.
Go ahead, Trustee Kurzman.
Oh, thank you. And I'm sorry to have interrupted.
No problem at all.
So I would just like to share a personal experience, you know, having lived for 6 years near a community playfield where there are batting cages. I just use Google Maps and I see that I'm about 1,000 feet from a batting cage, but there are 3 street rows of houses between me and the batting cage. But yet on certain days I hear it, and you know, to some degree that's the sounds of summer. You know, to hear ball games at community playfield, but in a more concentrated endeavor of a session in a batting cage, you know, I can appreciate the impact. And I guess what I'm trying to contribute to the conversation here is we've heard, you know, from 7 neighbors, 6 supportive and one not. But this is, in my view, based on my experience, this is really not at all giving us a clear picture of what the impact will be to the neighborhood. And so I just put that out there for people to consider, that There'll be plenty of people out there who are just going right now, what is that noise? And they have no idea where it's coming from, and they're a couple blocks away. I just want to share that personal experience living near a batting cage.
Thank you, Trustee Kurzman. All right, other questions for Mr. Adler? Other questions for the applicant? All right, we typically allow the applicant, if any final words, please, you don't feel the need that you have to, but if there was something that somebody said that you'd like to respond to, we'll offer the floor to you one more time.
I guess I just have one more thought, and that is the crux of this is the yard that I've been given, and there's been a lot of discussion about whether it's the front yard, the backyard, the side yard. My address is 1111 Sheridan. The technical classification, I think the legal classification of this property, it's a rear yard of a double frontage lot. That's from the materials there. So based on the discussion I just heard, it sounds like one would, if this was in somebody's backyard, you would say, okay, let's go through the variance process to make sure we want to allow that, but it would probably be blessed. And the only reason that it wouldn't be blessed is if it was in a front yard. And I would just say that our property is very unique in the neighborhood. And if I had a traditional backyard, certainly that's where it would be. And then this final point is that we're talking about, again, about 15 minutes every couple of days. And I would challenge anybody who's heard more usage than that in the last, the last couple of weeks. And I don't think that that's too unusual. And, and when I'm taking meetings from my home, it's a lot harder to work through the lawnmowers and, people walking up and down Elmwood than, a 15-minute batting cage session.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, so if we were together, this would be the point where I would sort of straw poll people and look for people to raise their hands to sort of guide the conversation. But in this case, since Trustee Barrow sort of put the opposing view on it, I'm gonna speak first, because with the appropriate limitations, I could be in favor of this, and I'll tell you why. First off, let me just say, appropriate limitations would be something like, use from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., sort of normal, people are all awake type time. And for some limit, you referenced 15 minutes, but, no more than 30 minutes a day. If it was something like that, I would be supportive because, look, these are all judgment calls, and I respect Trustee Barrow's point of view and Mr. Shapiro's point of view, as well as Mr. Falcoff's point of view, but they're all subject to interpretation. And you could say the community character of our neighborhoods is that we are a family-friendly place, and that kids playing outside and kids playing in their front yard or their backyard or on the street or whatever is what we want in our community. And so, yes, this is, when I drove by it, I was like, oh, yeah, there it is. But is that really harming someone? And from a noise point of view, I'm sympathetic. And, my approach to limiting that would be at reasonable hours of the day and for a reasonable amount of time. So that limits, you're not going to have, hey, I've got 25 friends who are all coming over and we're going to all take turns pitching. And so from noon to 6 on a Saturday, you're going to be hearing noise. The items that were approved, the half pipe was approved. The hockey rink, and I remember the hockey rink case, and Trustee Sullivan might have been on the zoning board back then, but that was contentious. And frankly, I'm not so sure the neighbor was particularly interested in being a good neighbor in that case. There was some definite sort of confrontations, my recollection, in that one. But it was approved, and a batting cage was approved. And so I don't have as big an issue with the noise because I think you can limit it, and with the community character because I'm not so sure having kid-friendly stuff is out of character for Wilmette. It is a big question about where it's located, and if they had a alternative site, we would certainly say please use an alternative site. But again, these are all judgment calls on whether you think a standard is met or not, whether you think it's consistent with the community character. I don't think it would have any long-term impact on housing values. And I don't think that it's injurious if you limit the usage. So I offered my opinion up first because that's the other side of the argument, I think, Trustee Barrow. And so now I will just let it be a free for all, and whoever wants to speak next, we'll all talk, and then we'll see if anybody else wants to say one more word, and then we'll vote. Trustee Kurzman, you're laughing, so I should call on you first.
No, I just think you're humorous.
Trying to keep it a little light, you know.
I could speak.
Trustee
next.
Dodd, you're first. Let's roll.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to speak next just because I do feel I live in the neighborhood. I'm right around the corner from this particular property, or very close to. And, you know, I think Trustee Barrow brought up, I think there's two issues here. One is batting cages and whether we allow them, and the other is what we allow in the front yard. And so for me, and that's how I look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I respectfully agree with what you're saying a little bit, President Belinsky, about noise and, you know, things like that. And we want to be a family, obviously we want to be a family friendly neighborhood. We want people to be out in the yards playing. And so, you know, I think we maybe as part of this, depending on what we decide, it would be something that John and his team should look at about what requirements we have around batting cages and whether we allow them or not, because to me that is a noise related thing. But I just want to say that given that I live in this neighborhood 2 blocks away from this home, if one of my neighbors put up a batting cage in the front yard, I would not be in favor of it. And that's how I look at this. For me, I look at these kinds of issues, and I know this is clearly a judgment issue. And so I try to look at some of these issues a little more black and white, just to get. And so the reality is this is a double facing lot. And the applicant knew that this was a double facing lot at the time he bought the home. It has a front yard on Sheridan and it has a front yard on Elmwood. And that's very clear. And it's no different to me than when an applicant comes in front of us and complains about traffic on Sheridan Road, parking near a school, parking near a church, or anything, or train noise near the train. To me, those are part of where they decided where you live. And so in my mind, when I drive down Elmwood, this home has a front yard on Elmwood. And that's how I look at this, because I know for me, I do think this is setting precedent. I don't believe we want to allow swimming pools in the front yard, trampolines in a front yard, playgrounds in a front yard. I thought the pictures that Mr. Shapiro provided, which show what else is happening on Elmwood, is relevant to this case. And so for that reason, I tend to agree with Trustee Barrow. I do think this is unusual times, and I think we need to be respectful of that. And so I would support allowing this to stay up through the end of this pandemic, in the sense that it maybe would stay up through October 1st with some limitations. And then, God forbid that the pandemic is into next year for a little bit, we might allow it next summer. But that would be the extent of what I would allow, because I do think these are unusual times, and we want to be flexible to just the impact this has to everybody in the community. So I would build on President Belinsky's, limitations, but after that, I would not be in favor of supporting this long term.
Thank you, Trustee Dodd.
If nobody else is going to speak, I'd be happy to.
Trustee Kennedy, the floor is yours.
I wish I could have said it better than Kathy Dodd. I'm sorry, Trustee Dodd, but I couldn't. I think that what she said is exactly how I feel about this. It's not a terrible thing, but I don't think we want to start allowing recreational equipment of this size and scope and that has this amount of impact on the neighborhood in front yards. And I'm sympathetic that people have houses or lots that make it more difficult to do things than if you had a regular lot, but that's just as it is. And the homeowner knows that when they buy it. And that doesn't mean you get to change things around and have things in your front yard that other people would have in their backyards. And I also agree with Kathy that these are special times, and I can see doing something special or allowing it for a very limited period because of this special time. But I don't want to set a precedent of front yards being used for recreational equipment in this neighborhood or in the village in general. And so I would oppose it with the conditions that Kathy expressed about a temporary ability to do it during this crisis.
Trustee Plunkett, Trustee Sullivan, Trustee Kurzman.
So, yeah, I'd like to say that, first of all, I think Trustee Barrow did a really nice job setting it up. So I want to commend Trustee Barrow for the thoroughness that he put together the presentation. And it was thorough. But so
Hey, tonight's my night.
It's as if he was billing hours. It's as if he was
I'm
billing
gonna watch
hours,
the
you know?
replay. I want to hear it again.
I'd be a partner by now. That's right.
So a couple points that I make is we have a problem with people doing things without the permits. And, there is, there has to be some amount of consequence for that. So, yes, there are communications issues, and appreciate your points on that, President Bielinski. I think where I'm differing with colleagues' comments so far is that I think parks are family friendly and communal facilities are family friendly as well. And I'm also not seeing the link to the pandemic. I'm not aware of health risks of using a batting cage in a park. So that as a limitation. The others make sense to me, as you've laid them out, time of day, usage, etc. But I'm kind of not understanding that. And I think what I'm still grappling with is we still don't know what the impact is on the neighborhood. And we didn't get insight from Sandy Lane. We don't know beyond 6 or 7 folks what the impact is. And so, this is kind of a big deal with others coming down the pike. So, I am going to listen really intently to the remaining speakers to try to get my head on with this because, again, I think I'm defaulting to Trustee Barrow's really strong case that he led with.
Trustee Sullivan, Trustee Plunkett.
I'll say I'm struggling with this because we're all at home now, and I feel like as neighbors we do need to be respectful of other neighbors, whether it's having a television built into your backyard, which I think could be, I've heard a case of that, which would drive me crazy. There's a lot of noise going on. I mean, we have a trampoline in our backyard, and when we got it years ago when my kids were little, I thought, oh my gosh, my neighbors are just gonna, jump out of their skin. Now the kids barely jump on it. There's a lot of childhood noise generally, not even just people having parties, it's difficult to differentiate this from so many other uses that we do allow: pools, sport courts, tennis courts, basketball courts, volleyball courts, a lot of this. I think the front yard is a matter of visually, not sound, because I think it probably bothers people less in a front yard than it would be if you were, sitting having dinner and there was a batting cage going on next to you. But on the other hand, I appreciate Trustee Barrow's comments and Trustee Dodd's comments. This is a high use, and the houses are close together, and we do have to appreciate that. I'm struggling with this one. It's not that easy. My first inclination was, this isn't that big of a deal. I'm kind of on the fence.
Trustee Sullivan.
Yeah, as far as the 7 standards for the variation, I can get comfortable because I do think it's a hardship, and I understand by definition it looks like 2 front yards, and we could always say they're accountable for what they bought, but we've given because of unique lots, and this is one of those unique lot situations in the village where we've made exceptions before and variations. And actually, in this case, I think that lot is a hardship, and in this case, this isn't a permanent structure, in my opinion. This could last, whether it's 8 months of the year, depending on the season and how well we go. And if this gentleman or this family lives there, my hunch is this kid's going to age and eventually leave the home, so he's not going to be there forever. So
let's hope.
You said that, not me. But I understand, and so I think for that I can get through with the 7 standards. And actually, I think you picked up on the 11 standards for special use. First of all, this runs with the use, not the lot. So it is something that we could put restrictions on. It's not going to be. It's not a special use that's going to go in perpetuity, so we can define that. I would be okay maybe if we put limits on that, they're not batting at 11 o'clock at night and lights and all of that. But, I actually don't think it's as injurious in C as some of the other things that the unusual recreational equipment, mainly we've talked a lot about ice rinks. There's a lot of ice rinks. I think I've heard there's over 1,100 ice rinks in the village. And a lot of those don't have nets, and those are played at night, and who knows where those pucks go. So I think we got to be careful on the can of worms we want to open when we talk about eliminating just batting cages, because that could spill over into a lot of other, in my opinion, recreational equipment that people have installed. And I don't think it's the character. I think in this case, most people on this will probably drive right by and not know it. But I do agree. I think if there's limits and to be courteous to the neighbors as we do in this case. My hope is, and it sounds like the neighbors could come up with a resolution and say, when we do it so it's not bothersome, we're all working from home, or most people are working from home, so we'll probably hear it a little bit more than usual, but hopefully there's a solution there. And again, playing basketball is just as loud at night, playing hockey rinks is just as loud at night, and most of those go on at night. So hopefully there's a solution here, and I could get comfortable supporting this.
All right, so it sounds like there isn't support. Well, it's unclear. Trustee Plunkett, Trustee Kurzman, it doesn't sound like there's support. Let's start at the top. There isn't support at all for just a blanket. It's okay. One step from that is there's some support for, maybe putting an expiration on it. When their son graduates from high school, limiting the hours of use and limiting the amount of use. There's some support for that. It appears there's sufficient support for a temporary, okay, we're going to have some acknowledgement of the weird times we're living in. And so we'll in essence, and I think we'd ask Mr. Adler and Mr. Stein, would in essence approve the special use for 6 months or something like that, or if we wanted to extend into next year, and then that special use would be over with. Is that, Mr. Stein, is that how you would like? Let's just take where Trustee Dodd was going, where we've got the pandemic, and maybe you want to go, just in case, you go to like June 1st or something like that of next year. Is that how we would handle that?
Well, if you want to go to the pandemic, I think it would be easier just to say when the village emergency declaration is no longer
that's true.
expired, and then you know exactly when it is. I can't tell you when the pandemic's going to end, so but I can tell you when we expired emergency declaration.
Right. Okay, that's a good point. That's even better because it's tied. It's later or earlier. So it sounds like there's support for if you will, a temporary special use. My sense is with those same restrictions, though, in terms of time, hours of operation and length of operation, and from the sounds of it, including Trustee Barrow, although with the exception of Trustee Kurzman, there is support for some sort of COVID exception, time period exception. I think there's a majority of the board that would support that. So I'm going to go back to Trustee Plunkett and Trustee Kurzman. Sort of the in-between here is the temporary okay versus a full-on okay, maybe expiring when the son graduates from high school. And if neither of you can get comfortable with it lasting till the son graduates from high school, then I think we're defaulting to the temporary with the limitations, and we'll ask the applicant if they'll accept those. And if they would, we would vote on that. So Trustee Plunkett, Trustee Kurzman, actually both of you would need to be considering. I think it's just Trustee Sullivan and I that would have this perspective. If either of you is not comfortable with sort of a, until high school is over use, then we're defaulting down to the sort of the COVID time period.
I just have a question, if I might. Excuse me, Trustee Plunkett. For Trustee Barrow, just as compelling as I found you, I'm curious whether you were compelled by things that you heard and whether you.
Oh, I apologize, Trustee Barrow. I should have given you an opportunity to speak. My oversight, Trustee Kurzman. Thank you for bringing that up.
Well, thank you. I had suggested during my presentation that the cage be allowed to remain through the end of this baseball season, which is the end of October. I think with appropriate limitations, I could get comfortable with a longer period of time. I would suggest that perhaps June. Needless to say, none of us knows when this COVID thing's going to be over. I suspect we may be having these same conversations at this time next summer. And I would not want to grant an approval tonight that carried this that long.
So you'd like a limit, an outside limitation anyways, even if we still are in emergency declaration.
Yes,
and if
I
we're
would.
talking about it next summer, it won't be me. It'll be you guys.
That is not my problem. Yes, I would be amenable to say the end of June of 2021 if we're still, doing what we're doing. Assuming that we have appropriate use limitations that the applicant has expressly agreed to, and those have to be, limitations on the number of minutes per day, and the absence of using a ball machine, and I don't know, maybe a few other things I haven't thought of, but certainly things that we can do to minimize the impact of the cage. But again, I am sympathetic. We're living in a time when we're all at home and our kids are at home, and we're dealing with one another way more than we want to. I totally get that, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So I am sympathetic to the idea of doing something good for your family. I just I share the concern that many of us have about doing that in the front yard of a home.
Okay,
So
I
think the nutshell for me is I think I can be flexible on some of this. I didn't see the direct COVID impact or public health perspective, but maybe I don't need to. I can probably be flexible with some of the others, but I do think having some serious some restrictions like Trustee Barrow spoke about would work for me.
But Trustee Kurzman, what wouldn't work for you is just until their son graduates from high school, though.
Well, I'm looking at Trustee Dodd. She's like, all right.
Well, no, I realize Trustee Dodd, Trustee Kennedy, and Trustee Barrow have been clear. You and Trustee Plunkett said you're sort of on the fence. So,
yeah.
Trustee Plunkett, Trustee Kurzman still considering. I mean.
So did in the Sandy Lane house, was that one of the restrictions until the child graduated high school? Was that also one of the restrictions on that one?
That actually went 2 years after approval. I think it got approved November of 2010, and it had to be removed after use in 2012. I think it did tie into the graduation of the son.
Okay, so even in that case, and is that the only case that we have permitted a batting cage that we knew about?
Correct.
Okay. So, I could be amenable to that. I don't know if there's enough support for that, but, I could be amenable to, to that use. I know all the trustees would, are not in agreement with that.
Okay, so Trustee Kurzman, I think where we stand is there's 3 trustees who would be willing, with limitations in terms of an outside date of when the son graduated from high school, limitations on the hours of use and the amount of time used, would be comfortable with that. There's 3 trustees that I believe sort of the next step down from that would be they're not comfortable. In essence, they're comfortable with everything except the outside date is either the earlier of the emergency order being lifted in the village. So in essence, the pandemic is over, or Trustee Barrow tossed out June 30th of 2020. So in essence,
I'm with the more restrictive group.
Okay.
And I just want to clarify something.
Go ahead, Trustee Dodd.
Just to make, for the applicant to understand. I mean, so the special use would run out, whatever is the earliest of those 2. And, if what Trustee Kurzman said is, they can always come back to request another special use to get it extended. And we might have feedback by then, as Trustee Kurzman mentioned, about what people in the community might be thinking and if we have others. So that's not saying, I don't know, but for right now, we're only allowing it for this period of time.
Right. That's right, Trustee Dodd. Yes.
President Belinsky, let's not lose sight of the fact, though, that what we are doing is granting permission for this to be in a front yard, in essence.
I know.
That's right. But again,
and
I don't think, see, Trustee Barrow, if it was in someone's front yard and they had a rear yard, we wouldn't be here right now. We wouldn't be, that'd be a non-starter. This is solely, and again, as you know, it's sort of this is solely based on the shape of the lot. So there is no precedent that, well, we let a front yard. This is exclusively, they have Sheridan Road and Elmwood, and it's this shaped lot in this particular spot. And that's the whole concept of the special use. So I disagree that we're setting precedent, because you show me another lot that's exactly like this, and then, okay, maybe we are. But if somebody has a backyard, there's no way we're going to let them put a batting cage in the front yard. No way.
That's right.
Okay, I agree with that. Yeah. Okay.
Or a swimming pool or a basketball court.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
I
think I heard you say,
but
go ahead, Trustee Dodd.
I mean, Trustee Barrow, I'm in agreement with what you started out with, and I'm struggling with this, and I do believe it still is in the front yard. We're just not all of us agree with that here. But I'm also agreeing with the fact that these are unusual times, which is why I like your proposal. These are unusual times, and we are trying to be family friendly, especially during these periods of time. We are trying to, make some exceptions here because how we all are struggling, and who's to say that if this is going to help this kid, get through this pandemic, what's what we want to do to help, right? And I mean, that's kind of the way I look at it, and so that's why I like ending it the earlier or the end of our emergency declaration, or June. I would have said June 1st personally, but whatever. I don't care about the date. And then, by then we might get additional feedback that nobody in the neighborhood. I'm the only one who lives in the neighborhood who doesn't like it. Also,
And let me clarify. I agree. We're putting it. I agree. It's a front yard. I never said it's not a front yard. I'm agreeing with the hardship, though, because it's a double front yard. And as President Belinsky said, if this guy had a backyard, as 98% of the community does, we wouldn't have talked for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right.
That's fair.
No doubt.
Okay, so let me try and wrap this up. I believe, and Trustee Barrow, I'm going to add your other limitation because I think it's a good one. So I believe that there is support for. And let me outline it. Then I'm going to ask the applicant if they're willing to accept those conditions. And then I'm going to ask Trustee Barrow to amend the motion. And I can't remember who the second was on this.
It was Trustee Dodd.
Okay. So then I'll ask the second if it's okay. And then the motion will be amended and then we'll vote on it. So this is what I've got. And Mr. Stein, you're taking notes, I trust. that it is a temporary use that expires at the earlier of the end of the village's emergency declaration or June 30th of 2021. The use of the facility will be between the hours of 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. and for not more than 30 minutes a day. And then Trustee Barrow, I will include, and that there will be no pitching machine installed. It will be as you are using it now today with someone pitching. I think I captured what we sort of have a consensus on. Anybody disagree with that?
Mr. President,
yes,
I think you did absolutely capture it, but there was also the potential, one of the potential conditions that was listed was about artificial illumination.
Oh, yeah, and definitely no lights. Yeah, definitely no lights. I mean, no lights. This is, and presumably 9 to 7, the lights would only come into play, but that was the idea, that there'd be no lights, absolutely.
And there was also a discussion about, or a potential about the time of year. I don't know if that's applicable or not, but I believe in the PowerPoint, it was from November to March that it could not be used. I don't know. It matters, but it was just something that I want to make sure we cover.
I'm not as concerned about that because I go back to the hockey rink analogy where everybody's inside, the windows are closed.
Yep.
And if somebody's taking a couple of swings December 1st, that doesn't trouble me, but does it trouble any of the other members of the board?
Well, we've just been hearing that this is temporary, so.
Yeah, I would say it has to come down from November 1st to, I think what was in the original, November 1st to March 1st.
Okay.
March 31st, I believe.
March 31st, yes.
Well, let's make it November 1 to March 1. Is that okay? It could be a warm spring again, you know. Come on. And if we're still in the pandemic, let's cut them some slack on that one. So we'll add, Mr. Stein, no lights, and that the equipment will be removed from the yard from November 1st to March 1st.
Did we and what was the end date?
June 30th of 2021, the earlier of June 30, 2021, or the lifting of the emergency order in the village. My emergency order, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Just going to throw out one possibility. I know I'm nitpicking. The new tier baseball season will go to June 26th this year.
But there's June.
Whatever.
Let's leave it on June.
Not June 26th to June 30th. I'm just saying, can we leave this up till the end of the baseball season?
Well, we're past it if we're June 30, right?
Yes, but if the pandemic order ends in March, I was just not the 4 days that I'm quibbling with. I'm just quibbling with the pandemic ending versus the end of the baseball season.
I'm not sure there's support for that. I think what Trustee Plunkett is suggesting is that if the pandemic is over, that the applicant will get the use through June 30th of next year, regardless. That's what you're suggesting, right, Trustee Plunkett?
Right.
There's not support.
I don't think there's support for that. I got 3 nods no, 4 nod no. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, Mr. Stein, would you read back what we've got here?
All right, so we have the special use shall not be in operation and the equipment shall be moved from November 1st of each year to March 1st of the following year. The special use shall not be used before 9 a.m. and after 7 p.m. of each day the use is in operation. The special use shall not be used for more than 30 minutes at a time in a day. The special use shall cease all operations and be removed from the property in its entirety by the earlier of June 30th, 2021, or at the time the village's emergency declaration in relation to COVID-19 pandemic is no longer in effect. The special use shall not be artificially illuminated. The special use shall not include or allow in any manner the use of a pitching machine or any other type of powered mechanical equipment.
I think that covered it.
Hope so.
President Belinsky, can I get a clarification, please, of the 30 minutes? Are we saying it can be used for 30 minutes in total during the 9 to 7 period?
I believe that's what we're saying. Mr. Stein, if you would clarify, make sure that it's clarified. It's 30 minutes total within the usable hours of the day.
Yes.
As opposed to 30 minutes now and 30 minutes later, I think is what you're saying.
It'd be 30 minutes total within the day.
Yes. Okay. I think that captures it. So now I will ask the applicant, if you're willing to accept those conditions, we will vote on this.
I'll be honest. I don't think that's fair. We've already got a batting cage up there, and it was granted with conditions, and it was expired when the kid graduated from school. I don't think this is any different. I think there are points raised about not wanting to put something in the front yard, but all of my neighbors, the three that touch my house, nobody has issues there. I just think it's not equitable application of the rule. Not to mention all the other batting cages that are out there. And I appreciate the discussion about the pandemic, but that doesn't have a ton of play. I mean, by October 1st, it's probably too cold to go out there to hit anyway. And the cage has got to come down so that it doesn't wreck the structure. So I would take it down on October 1 anyway. It's usually you can't get out there before March. I did appreciate trying to compromise and say, well, let's get it out through at least through the end of the new year baseball season, which was June. I thought that was positive. But again, I don't know why this is any different than the other batting cages and all the other special variances that have been granted. So I don't think it's fair.
Well, your point is taken, and that doesn't surprise me. However, where we are right now is you can accept where we have the votes, or you can reject what we have, and then we'll vote it down, and then the structure will come down tomorrow. So unfortunately, you really don't have a choice. If you'd like to continue to use the property, you have to accept the conditions that the board are putting on it. I'm not going to force you to, and we could vote no, and that's fine. But that is sort of the situation. If you've listened to the exchange that we've had here, that's where there's support for the maximum amount of use of this equipment on your property. So
could we make a compromise and get it through June, through the end of the baseball season? Because March 1st is when they even start practicing. So if once it comes down in October, it won't be used anytime between October and March. So it might as well just come down at the end of October, or the end like October 1.
I need one
that's
nod
a
yes
fair
out
compromise.
of the four who were opposed to that, if you're willing to make that compromise.
And subject to the other restrictions, which I think are fair.
And describe then the period that the cage could be used?
So it would probably go up on March 1, and it would probably come down on October 1.
No, I don't think
in
there's
a
any
normal
support.
situation,
I don't think there's any support for going to October 1. I thought you were asking, could it go to the end of the new
I'm
baseball
sorry.
season?
I'm thinking in a normal situation. Where we are right now, I'd probably take it down on October 1. I'd put it back up on March 1, and then we could take it down the end of June when baseball season is over.
Okay, so the ask is, instead of it coming down at the end of the pandemic, that it just be a fixed date that it comes down the end of June.
Yes, that would be my request.
And I think there are three supporters, because Trustee Plunkett had raised this, Trustee Sullivan and I believe, would agree to that. But we need one more vote to do that, and if not, we'll default back to where we were.
I'll agree to that. This is Trustee Kennedy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I'd be fine with that. I mean, I don't think we want to quabble over, 2 months or 3 months with this family, honestly. I mean, in the interest of what we're trying to accomplish here.
Okay, so Mr. Stein, the temporary use shall run till June 30th of 2021.
That's correct. I deleted the other language.
Okay, so now I'll ask the applicant, are the conditions acceptable to you?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any further discussion from any of the board members? All right, so now Trustee Barrow, if you would, if you're willing to amend your motion, we could go through the other process, but if you're willing to amend your motion, we'll go through the movant and the second instead.
Now, I'm not entirely clear. Do I need to repeat the original? No.
I think you can just say, we amend the motion based on what Mr. Stein had relayed to us a moment ago.
Why did you say that? I hereby move that we amend the motion which I made for case 3.5, consistent with the conditions described by Mr. Stein.
Okay.
I will second that.
Okay, so the movement and the second have accepted the motion, so the motion has been amended. And I think we're at this point where the clerk just needs to call the roll on the motion.
Trustee Sullivan.
Aye.
Trustee Vero.
Aye.
Trustee Dodd.
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman.
Aye.
Trustee Kennedy.
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett.
Aye.
President Valinsky.
Aye, so motion carries. The Zoning Board of Appeals recommendation stands as amended, and the ordinance is adopted as amended. Trustee Barrow, do you have any more fun for us tonight? What else is on the
No,
agenda?
President Valinsky, all the matters are on the consent agenda.
Okay. So we'll move on to the Finance Committee. Trustee Kennedy?
Yes, tonight we have a report from the staff regarding the July 2020 COVID financial update and the fiscal year 2021 budget review. So I turn the floor over to Mr. Raymond, Mr. Hallgren, and Ms. Malloy.
I've shared the screen for the presentation. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
All right. So tonight, as part of the mid-year financial review, we're going to focus on two areas. The first area is financial performance through the month of July, and then providing an overview of our 2021 budgetary philosophy. And so if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please stop me at any time. I'm going to try to move through quickly as we've had positive performance during this past month. So period 7 continued a trend of encouraging financial performance amidst the pandemic. In the month of July, revenues were 2.3% above budget, and we overperformed comparatively to both of our scenarios. Now, a large part of this overperformance was because of the timing of property taxes. We had initially pushed back the due date for property taxes from July to October. However, it appears that most taxes were paid in accordance with our expected time frame. And we've removed those future revenues from the month of October to properly project out for the remainder of the year. But from an overall perspective, the month of July continued to show positive performance. If we were looking at all other revenues excluding property taxes, we performed around 20% above scenario 2. So again, this is just a reiteration of our overall performance during the last 4 months where we've developed the model. Overall, our revenue performance has been somewhere between our budgetary expectations and both of our scenarios. But overall, we continue to be down comparatively to our budget, but we are closely aligning with our predictions, and then we feel very confident in our future revenue estimates throughout the remainder of the year. In regards to our future estimates, we still want to maintain a conservative approach to our revenue projections. What this table is showing is what our revenue reduction estimates are for the fourth quarter, as well as for the entirety of 2020 in our scenario 2. So as you can see, home rule sales tax, as an example, we are still expecting a 40% reduction in the fourth quarter and a 26% overall reduction in revenue for 2020. But even so, we continue to predict a future economy that is slightly better than quarter 2 and quarter 3, but we still are expecting to have significant downturns in the last part of the year. In the financial model for August, we made several minor adjustments. We increased income tax estimates based upon preliminary information from the state, and we increased real estate transfer tax based upon our last 2-month performance. So according to John Nash, we had a strong summer of sales, with June having 57 detached single-family homes go under contract, and July having 59. These sales figures ranked amongst the top months for which Wilmette has had over the past 10 years. So part of this trend is due to our low mortgage rate and continue movement out to the suburbs. All the other revenue sources stay consistent with our prior assumptions, but we have seen positive movement in sales tax and permits, which may shift our future months. So this chart is showing our overall model and how our total revenues have changed for the whole year. Our overall budgets are at 34. Our budget is at $34 million. And as we've progressed throughout the different iterations of the model, currently scenario 1 is sitting just below $32 million expected total revenue. And in scenario 2, we're expecting around $31.5 million in overall revenues.
And Eric, the reality here is, I believe that the pickup here is based on actual performance. You guys haven't really bumped much at all the future revenue model. This is just incorporating the fact that we're doing better than we thought we were going to do.
That is correct. So if you look at our actual performance in areas like sales tax or real estate transfer tax, essentially we're taking the gains from those. We're not making adjustments to future month projections. We're taking the gains from those positive performance, and that's boosting our overall revenue projections.
Right.
Yep.
Rolling forward the actual, in other words.
Correct. Yes. So again, our hope is that the economy continues to recover and that these lines continue to trend upwards because we have been seeing some positive overall performance. But with that in mind, our year-to-date revenues are still down comparatively. We are down 3.8% compared to budget, and our year-end projections still estimate a revenue loss of around between 6.5% and 7.7%. So we will continue to be conservative in our estimates and only make significant changes when there are clear economic trends that appear. So shifting over to the expense side, again, the month of July expenses were 23% below budget, and overall we've been down around 9% through 7 months. Again, the biggest areas of underspend are really related with capital projects and purchases. So these were really timing focused. So the purchase of the ambulance, road programs that we had expected to spend in the second quarter, we have not spent dollars on those. We have shifted those expenses out to quarter 3 and quarter 4 so that we have a full scope of what our expected year-end expenses will be. This slide goes through our expense assumptions. I don't want to focus on a lot on this because there's been not a lot has changed in this space, but I did want to look at 2 particular areas. We have added back $40,000 in expenses that had previously been cut, $25,000 for tree pruning and $15,000 for winter hanging baskets. The other part that I did want to note is that our additional expenses where we had approved an additional $530,000 for economic grants. At this point in time, about half of those dollars have been distributed. So if we don't authorize additional grants moving through the remainder of the year, that $276,000 would be added back to our reserve level.
Eric?
Yes.
This is Trustee Dodd. I just have a question for you on, these additional economic grants. And have you had any businesses that have come to you and asked if we're going to go through another round of this, or just curious if any of
At this point in time, I have not personally received any feedback regarding additional economic grants. The chamber has not reached out directly on any questions. But I wasn't, but that's just at a personal level. I don't know if there's been any other outreach to community development or other departments.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Mr. Brayman or Mr. Adler have there been any further discussions or inquiries regarding this? Because Trustee Dodd, I don't think we promised that we're going to do that, but this was sort of held in reserve in case we had some big second wave and had another massive shutdown?
So like Eric, I'm not aware of any, and I do have, pretty regular contact with the chamber and a number of our business owners. We do have one service business who was not eligible, given their type of practice in the first round, who had asked if we have a second round to have a consideration and change in eligibility. But that's been the extent of my contacts with any of our business owners.
Okay. Great.
So looking at the overall expense outcomes, again, we're looking at our expected year-end spend is around $34.7 million, which is just about a 2% overall reduction in our expenditures. But as I had previously alluded to, that underspend that we saw in the month of June and July, you can see the green bars below the gray. Those dollars did shift out into September, October, and November, where you can see that yellow bar is exceeding what our initial budget projections were. But staff will continue to monitor the budget for savings and into the board. And then what this ultimately culminates in is our overall impact on our reserve level. Our budget expected around a 38% reserve level. But due to our expense and revenue reductions, our ending scenario balances now range from 33% to 34.5% in scenario 1. The other part I did want to discuss here is that in addition to this overall analysis, we did a sensitivity analysis to look at the risk of a worst case scenario. For this, staff assessed the month with the worst performance, which was May, which performed at 32% below budget, and we applied that percentage to September through December. So overall, applying this additional loss would be an additional downside risk of around $440,000, which equates to about a 1.5% reserve level reduction. But overall, our main takeaway is that while the impact of COVID has and may continue to be significant, the reserves are doing what they were intended to do. They're providing relief when there are serious financial pressures that are outside of our control.
And Trustee Dodd, I think the box at the bottom is sort of responsive to your question from our last meeting, which seems like it was forever ago because it was a month ago.
Yeah, thank you, President Belinsky. That's really helpful. I appreciate it.
So with that, that concludes just the overview of the financial performance for the month of July. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer any of those. If not, I'm going to turn the presentation briefly over to Mike to start the 2021 budget preview.
Yeah, and I know the trustees had the opportunity to be briefed on this by the village staff individually, but if there are any questions, I mean, I think the news is pretty good here. My recollection is our reserve level as a percent of revenue was like just over 30 or just below 30 in our last look at scenario 2. So this is good news, and not based on goosing the projections, but just based on the actuals coming in higher than expected and rolling through the numbers.
I had one question. Wasn't in the presentation, and I was starting to look through it, is Melinda on the phone?
I'm here.
I just was curious if you could give us a sense of what's going on in the water fund, and given that it's been a real dry summer, maybe that will also help a little bit.
Yep. So if you had a chance to look at the monthly financial reports, the water and the sewer fund were both reviewed in there. And one of the things that you will notice, and it's to your point, Trustee Dodd, is that consumption is performing better than last year. And really because of the way that we, especially on the residential side, it's reflecting 2.5 months earlier. We are starting to see the effects of the drought that was happening really starting more in June. The wholesale rate is one that's going to give you a better sense because it's 1 month in arrears. And that's performing, I think, about 5% better than what we had anticipated, what we were showing last year in terms of consumption rate, because we know for the last several years, consumption has declined considerably from where our budget projections were. So bottom line is both the water and the sewer fund are performing relatively close to budget. They're still not there, but they're going in the right direction. And I anticipate we're going to see that continue for the next several months. Which, how that will flow into the general fund is, as you're going to recall in other slides, we project over $1 million transfer from the water fund to the sewer fund. So we expect that the water fund is definitely,
Melinda, to the general fund, water fund to the general fund, right?
Once we go after 10 o'clock at night, I am sorry, you are correct. It is from the water fund to the general fund. So that transfer we should expect is going to occur because the water fund will have sufficient revenues to allow that to happen.
That's more good news.
It's great news. And North Main is on as a new wholesale water customer, and they are performing as we were expecting as well, which is phenomenal news.
Awesome. Yep. And thank you. I did see that in the packet as well, Melinda, but just thought it'd be helpful for you to share that.
Good question,
That's
Trustee
good
Dodd. Thank you. All right, so I think we're back now. I think we're on Mr. Brayman to talk about next year's budget. It's a preview. No decisions tonight.
No decisions, very high level discussion here. So this will be my 11th budget to work on in Wilmette, and it's certainly the most unique circumstance I've been in terms of budget preparation, and I was here during the depths of the Great Recession. But it's also just the most challenging to project what's going to happen, especially, summer, fall, winter of next year. Usually, we have a really solid handle on where our revenues are going to end up, 14 months in advance, knowing, when we put our budget together, where we think we're going to end the year, we feel pretty comfortable. For next year, we just don't have that comfort level because there's so many unknowns. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I've talked to the staff a lot about this and trying to think about the best way to approach next year's budget, with the primary goals of limiting impacts to our taxpayers, maintaining all of the services our residents really value and appreciate, and continuing to invest in the infrastructure like we have been in the past few years. And ultimately, we landed on the conclusion that the best way to do that is to handle next year's budget very similarly to the way we handled this year's budget, which is to plan to do most of the work we've previously identified as being our critical needs and the services that we want to deliver, and then reviewing our financials on an annual monthly basis, just like Eric had done, and making decisions based on actual performance. So as we prepare the proposed budget for 21, we're going to look to continue all of this important work and scale back as we need to. It's much easier for us to scale down a budget in response to economic conditions than it is to scale up. In March, April, May, we can't all of a sudden decide to do more alleys or more roads or more sidewalks if we hadn't already done all the legwork and preparation to be ready to do that work. So I think we've proven out that this year's been a really successful process in reviewing our financials on a regular basis and adjusting up or down as needed with our expenses. I'm confident we can do that next year. And as Eric goes through the rest of the presentation, we'll talk about a new concept that we haven't really, addressed in the past in our budgeting, which are different tiers and levers that we can pull within those tiers if we need to pull down on expenses. And this will be a very high level review of those tiers, but as we present the budget in our October workshops, we'll dig into more detail on how those could look and how they would function, which I think will give the board more comfort that we do have a lot of flexibility as we enter fiscal year 2021. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Eric and he'll move through the presentation.
So when looking at the revenue parameters for the 21 budget development, we're starting with a review of the village's existing revenues and the diversity of those revenue streams. This review, combined with our financial modeling, gives us the ability to evaluate our revenue risks and our opportunities for 2021. And then the last parameter is really looking at the projected taxpayer impact for 21 and beyond. All of these factors help us to set the revenue framework as part of that budget development process. So the first component, revenue diversity, is understanding what revenues the village utilizes and maintaining balance amongst those revenue sources. We don't want to be too reliant on any revenue category, or we put ourselves at greater risk during different economic downturns. So the broad categories that we use, we're looking at service charges, including refuse fees and utility taxes, market-driven, which includes sales tax, intergovernmental, which includes grants and transfers, and the last component is property taxes. So from an overall perspective, the village's mix of revenues is fairly well balanced. And because of this balance amongst service charges, market revenues, and property taxes, it's really allowed us to weather the economic downturn associated with COVID with less impact than maybe other communities have had to deal with. So based upon this broad revenue categories and our financial performance through the first 7 months of the year, we're able to assess the risk of our different revenues into 4 categories. So the first category being minimal risk, this including property taxes, refuse fees. These are relatively stable revenue sources. The next category is our moderate risk, which includes sales tax, real estate transfer, and other economically sensitive revenues. Our high risk, which includes home rule sales tax, fuel, and hotel. These revenues really saw the biggest impact from COVID-19 on our revenue performance. And you may notice that sales tax and home rule sales tax aren't grouped together. And this is because the products that these taxes are applied to are different. As an example, sales tax applies to groceries, pharmaceuticals, other essential items, whereas home rule sales tax does not. And then the last category is looking at enhancements. So in 2021, the local use tax is changing its distribution method for online sales. Historically, it's been distributed on a per capita basis. It will now be distributed based upon where the sale originates. The water fund transfer may increase based upon like what Melinda just talked about, positive performance, but also bringing online North Main sales. The village has started our reimbursement process for reimbursements through the CARES Act from the federal government and Cook County. And then this village has been in receipt of around $600,000 in infrastructure funds, and we can review how those will be utilized. And lastly is looking at review for other revenue sources for the village. So this chart shows the information that was used as the broad revenue assumptions and how they would impact taxpayers from 2020 through 2025. In 2021, there was a projected property tax increase of around 4%, no change in the water rate, a slight increase in sewer fee, a $30 increase in the average stormwater fee, a refuse increase that was commensurate with the increase in our collection contract, and no change in our vehicle sticker rate. So, and then when we take a more focused look at our property taxes, it's comprised of 4 main components: operations, road investment, public safety pensions, and debt service. Our projected 4% increases less than the 2020 levy increase of just under 5%. And it should be noted that the pension increase included the phasing in of our 15-year rolling amortization plan. So our 2020 increase was approximately $90 for the average bill, or $900,000 total, and our 2021 projected rate would equate to around an $800,000 increase in property taxes.
Mr. Hallgren?
Yes.
Is the decrease in the debt service due to the coming refunding bonds, or is that something else?
So I believe that
in other words, is it that we're paying down the debt, or is it that we're refunding it that's causing it to go from 12% to 5%?
Can I jump in? Is that okay, Eric?
Yes, I was going to turn it over to you.
It's just a function of the level of the current debt that we have right now, Trustee Kennedy. So it is not going up by it's only going up by a small margin from one year to the next. That's what you're seeing, why you're seeing such a small increase in the debt service levy, because it's fairly level from one year to the next. That's what it's acknowledging.
Okay, so the debt service savings from the refunding and that's not factored in here at all?
You are correct. It's not factored in here. So this was based, what Eric is showing you is when we were putting the budget together last year, the knowns that we had in place, that's what it took into account. So even though we had planned to do a refunding, we didn't know what those dollars were going to mean. So we know that there's going to be definitely an impact to the debt service.
And Melinda, correct me if I'm wrong here, but in terms of the refunding, well, we've been working with PMA and looking at trying to layer in that refunding to help cushion the impact of the issuance needed for Central Avenue. So as that wouldn't necessarily apply to the fiscal year 21 tax levy, it's more likely to the fiscal year 22 one. So that refunding won't necessarily reduce this debt service for 2021, but it'll help limit the impact when we add in that additional Central Avenue debt in future years.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, and Trustee Kennedy, I think Melinda said this pretty clearly, but remember, this is the increase in the debt service. It's just a smaller increase in 21 versus 20.
Yes, but I figured that's a net number, right? Or no?
Yeah, it is net.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's net.
Okay,
It's net,
so
but you're starting at a point.
Yes.
And it's how much does it go up? So.
Right. I understand, but it's net of your savings. And so it's, yeah, got it. I think we're all on the same page. Thank you.
So switching over to the expense side for our parameters, staff's focus in developing our 21 budget includes the development of a review reduction methodology similar to what Mike had discussed, a preview of our capital investment for village infrastructure, and our assumptions that we're utilizing for personnel costs. So our review methodology for the 21 budget is consisting of breaking our expenditures into 4 different tiers. If revenues don't meet those different projections, these tier levels can be pulled to manage our expenses. So as Mike mentioned, scaling back our work if revenue isn't meeting our expectations. And these tier options will be presented to the board as part of our budget workshop. So that first tier consists of looking at internal control measures. The second tier consists of looking a review of our capital investment. The third tier consists of reviewing our contracted programs and services. And the last tier is consisting of reviewing our services and associated staffing levels. So looking at one of our major categories in our overall budget is capital investment. Our current request for 2021 is around just over $25 million. And this request is going to be discussed further at the September 10th workshop, but we wanted to provide a quick preview. As you can see, the village is investing heavily in stormwater and roadways. This overall project or overall request includes $15.3 million for Hibbard Park for the neighborhood storage project, $3.4 million for Central Avenue, and $4.1 million for our engineering program or our road work. So, and then the last part I wanted to mention here is that the village has received just under $600,000 in state infrastructure funds that can be used for specified projects. And as part of the budget process, staff will come to the board with a recommendation to consider as part of the budget. The other major expense component of the budget is our personnel expenditures. So salary assumptions include a 2.5% wage adjustment, which is consistent with the police collective bargaining agreement. On the benefits side, healthcare is projected to go up 7%. Our IMRF pension rate is going to be going down to 10.8%. And then our public safety pensions have an estimated contribution of around $6 million, which includes a $500,000 drawdown of reserves as we move towards the 15-year rolling amortization process. So just as an FYI, staff is planning to move forward with the additional $200,000 contribution this month for the public safety pensions. And then moving forward, the following schedule lays out the plan for the budget process throughout the end of the year. Our next planned meeting is the CIP workshop on September 10th, followed by budget workshop in late October, potential second workshop in early November, and then the budget ordinance adoption and our property tax ordinance adoption in late November, early December. So with that, I will be happy to answer any other questions that you may have. Thank you.
Trustees, any questions? This is a preview and obviously a lot more work for all of us to do. I'm getting a sense that it's 10:21 at night right now.
I sense that they've done a good job, so we don't have.
They have done a very good job. And again,
Yeah,
I know
so
each
true.
of you has had a chance individually to review this, so many of your questions may have been answered already, but okay.
Okay, so all other items were considered on the consent agenda.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Kennedy. Administration Committee, Trustee Dodd.
All items were covered on consent.
Thank you. Trustee Sullivan, Municipal Services.
All items covered on consent.
Trustee Kurzman, the Public Safety Committee.
No report.
Judiciary Committee, Trustee Plunkett.
No report?
All right, there are no reports. I think that's on the agenda. There are no reports from our special committees, right? Yep, item 6.7, there are no reports from our special committees. Item 7 is new business, and there's no new additional business to discuss. Item 8 is adjournment. So may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
It was Trustee Kurzman, and is there a second?
Second.
That was Trustee Barrow. Would the clerk please call the roll on the motion to adjourn?
Trustee Sullivan.
Aye.
Trustee Barrow.
Aye.
Trustee Dodd.
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman.
Aye.
Trustee Kennedy.
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett.
Aye.
And President Belinsky.
Aye, so the motion carries. We stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Good
Thanks
night,
to staff.
everyone.
For good work on the finance stuff too.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Very good.
Awesome.
Good night.
You.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.